Okay, thank you very much for coming today. I'm getting, is that through your feedback? Yeah. Thank you very much for coming this morning to this meeting. A couple of things to say. Thanks for the officers coming. It's good to be here in a different venue. I'm slightly disappointed that we don't have a better turnout amongst members at the moment. I wonder if one or two of them have underestimated the distance they might have had to travel to get here, but for some of us, travelling a distance is part of the course. So I'm going to start on time. I'm not going to wait for them. So thank you very much for coming today. First of all, an apology that this meeting agenda was changed very late on. As you know, we were due to discuss at great length the water issue. Unfortunately, one of our prime speakers was unable to make the meeting at short notice, so we had to move. We felt it was very important to have that speaker present to allow balance to the debate. And so we are hoping, and this will come up later, that this will be a single item agenda and a special meeting next month. That comes up on the agenda, I think, so we can talk about that later. So our apologies for having to change that. I'm disappointed because I wanted to get this debate done. What I will say is that there's a number of important items on the agenda, and from a personal point of view, because we only meet once every 2 months, a lot of stuff gets bumped onto the agenda quite late because it has to come to us before it goes to full council, and this has made this potentially would have made this agenda extremely crowded and may not have allowed us to have had the kind of debate we want over the water issue. So in the long run, it might be a good thing. So welcome everybody. I'm presuming everybody can hear okay and that we're going through online. The agenda pack with papers is available via ModGov or directly from the council website from the link which was sent out to members. If I invite somebody to speak, could you clearly state who you are for the benefit of anybody who is listening to the meeting so they can identify who's speaking. Can I also warmly welcome any members of the public and media who are joining us today online or otherwise. This meeting is being recorded by the council. Finally, as agendas are now viewed electronically, could I kindly request that members and officers refer to page numbers from the published agenda pack to assist all present in finding the appropriate information. Okay, moving on. Apologies for absence then, please. I've had an apology from Adam Boyden, who's running late and will join us later. Minutes from the previous meeting. Who's taking that? It's for me to decide, but I guess we've all looked at it. Yes, Henry.
Mr. Chairman, at the previous meeting, it was correctly recorded that this meeting would be solely dealing with the water situation, and that if it wasn't, and it wasn't completed in time, that there would be an October meeting. I would like to know why, when that's in the minutes, we have yet to give a date for the October meeting, because the later we leave that date, the more difficult it's going to be to get research people to attend the meeting. There are other research people apart from Peter Lamb, who, just so you know, is paid for by the water industry. And Penny Johns told me nearly a month ago that she was not going to be available for September, but if she had a date, she would be available for October. I have written to Jamie Jackson and the monitoring officer asking for a date on 3 occasions, and it's yet to be put in the diary. If it had been in the diary, we would have been able to start planning for that meeting considerably before this. And I'm sorry, I don't accept it could have been put in the diary as if needed date. It didn't need to be down there as a permanent date, if you understand what I mean. It's now become needed, and we've yet to get any invitations out because we don't know the date.
Right, thank you for that. Well, unless an officer wants to respond to that, I will. Would you like to respond?
Yeah, I'm happy to, Chair, if you'd like me to. So, Councillor Hobhouse, I completely understand your frustration of where we are. It has proved incredibly difficult because we're hoping that 7 speakers from 7 different organisations will be attending. We are just coordinating diaries now with those 7 speakers. We are keen to make sure it is a fair and balanced debate and that members have all of the information before them. And I know Councillor Hobhouse was particularly keen for that to happen as well. And it is important members have all data in front of them and all of the relevant bodies involved with this. So as soon as we have that coordinated, I will confer with Jamie and obviously with the chair and get that date published.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kirsty. Henry Hobbs.
Sorry to come back, Mr. Chairman. There's a researcher who did all the agricultural research and wrote most of the CICIC paper, which is the basis for SAGIS and SIMCAT, who has agreed. I asked him if he would attend an October meeting. He has agreed to do it. I will give Kirsty his name. His name is Paul Withers. He's professor of this subject at Lancaster University. Penny Johns can only do certain dates in October. If we had the date, we would have been able to book her. I doubt we're now going to get her.
Thank you. I think you make a valid point. I was approached on this subject in pre-meeting, and at that point, I thought it was a good idea that we discussed when the next meeting would be, because we've all got commitments and it's difficult to schedule, and I thought it'd be better to discuss it in this room. And that was a couple of weeks ago. So that's my understanding of the situation, and that we will discuss it later and try and hit on a date.
Kirsty, can you please talk to me about the other researchers, and I will get in touch with them and give you their names and numbers.
Thank you, Henry. We have been in touch with Penny Johns and with Paul and a number of others. So Kate Murdoch is in contact, trying to coordinate all of those diaries so we get them all here. It's no mean feat, because October's a busy lecturing month for them as well.
I know.
What I would say is that in normal circumstances, normally the next meeting, the October meeting, will be actually an informal meeting, but that means we can ring fence that subject. What I cannot guarantee as chair is that I won't be asked to put something on an agenda in the future that on an urgent business, but it's really irritating, I agree, but it's almost impossible to keep an agenda to one item or a number of items and then find that actually there's important or urgent business comes forward that then has to go to full council. I can't turn around and say, well, I'm not discussing it. So, any idea in the future that we might be able to ring fence one particular debate and not have anything else on the agenda, I think is a lost cause.
I understand where you're coming from. It's all about call-ins. And if scrutiny deals with it before it goes to the executive or full council, it can't be called in, which is why you want to do it beforehand. But if that was the case, why in July was it pushed that we didn't have an October meeting? And because I said at the time we should actually have a October meeting, and it was agreed to change it by Alan, who's not here. Because they didn't want to have the October meeting. Now, if that's the case, Mr. Chairman, in future, when we need to do a specialist subject, can we have an agreement now that we will have an informal meeting off the agenda where nothing else is going to be brought on, so that and it's agreed in advance, and I mean permanently agreed?
I can't make that decision now off the top of my head. I take the matter into question. I do think you have a valuable point, but I'm not prepared without discussing it to say that I will do that. But what I will say, if you let me finish, is that I've been discussing with Scott Waldridge and other people the possibility, and the chairs of scrutiny are in agreement that there aren't enough meetings, and that we want to do something about that. So I'm hoping this situation won't arise again. Declarations of interest. Sorry, we haven't formally agreed the minutes. We've discussed that issue. Any others? Can I take it that we formally agree then? Right, thank you very much. Declarations of interest? Any interests other than those we know about as town or parish councillors? No? Okay, thank you. have next on the agenda is public question time. I'm wondering, we're going to find out now whether there's a couple of questions have been submitted and going to be read out. We want them actually before the item on the agenda. So,
well, I think these two, Chair, would come out now. Be read now.
Okay, all right then. So the item for public question, Linda Ann, is she in the room? Or online? Do we have, or Robbie Bentley? It's on.
Yeah.
Robbie, right, okay. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee, and thank you, officers. I'm speaking on behalf of Peter Travers of Somerset Catch the Bus campaign, who have been working with this council on matters relating to the uptake of passenger bus services across the county and the wider region. We have concerns about the proposal within this spatial planning committee, within this scrutiny for spatial planning, with respect to the heritage impact that the demolition of Yeovil's very long established building, which is currently used by First Earth and which is being proposed to be demolished in the near future. It is one of the more noteworthy buildings in Yeovil's long industrial heritage, and we do feel quite strongly that it is perhaps something that a listing may actually be appropriate for this. Having seen pictures of this myself, having seen the style of it, as well as the historical reference to this town and the way in which this town has been able to be developed, we are of the consideration that it is something that should at the very least be considered a heritage asset for the region, as well as for this town. And it is something that I do think is a little bit short-sighted, both from the perspective of how much revenue First could actually generate if they were to hold on to it, and the impact it could have. The bus depot has had many uses over the years, and to allow the demolition would, in our view, be very, very, very short-sighted. And we would ask that scrutiny consider whether or not a listing may be appropriate for this building. Thank you.
Thank you, Robbie. You catch me slightly unawares. I'm not sure whether it's in the remit of this committee to be able to have any say over listed buildings. Somebody like to answer that one for me? You believe it is? I don't believe it is, no. Yeah, sorry. Sorry,
Hi, just to say that listing to a large degree is a planning issue, and also you need to determine who is going to drive this, and you can do this as an individual, as a group. You can go to your town council, any of those options in terms of actually getting a listing. And if you want some support and advice, then it's worth talking to the conservation officer within planning south to actually take it further forward. But it's not actually necessarily the responsibility of the council per se to list.
Thank you for that. That's really useful. And I would recommend any councillors, particularly if you're from the Yeovil area or this particular broader area, that you also take this matter up with Robbie and offer advice where possible. Thank you.
The chat.
We have another speaker, I think, online. Yeah, is that Tony Rees? Yeah, Tony Rees, are you able to speak to us online?
Yes, I hope so. Can you hear me?
You can, thank you.
Okay, and you should be able to see me. I see there was a written notice put in about buses generally in Somerset, and we felt that the Scrutiny Committee should be aware of the feelings that we have about the provision of bus services in Somerset. You'll see in the public pack we talked about the bus depot. It's not just the fact that it's a building, it probably should be listed. It's probably not the right building to actually run today's bus services from. First Bus made the point that the depot used to have 30 or 40 buses. The current requirement as they see it is for 12 buses. And this is partly because the services have been run down so much. But the suggestion that they're going to close it completely, move somewhere else, do away with all light maintenance so that a bus that hasn't got its windscreen wipers working in the morning, for instance, will have to be replaced from somewhere else, we think is not the policy of somebody who should be running a service. We also feel fairly strongly now that First have not been running a proper public bus service. We need more publicity about the statements. We need more publicity about the failures of First to run services, and we need to involve the Traffic Commissioner. And I think that is the responsibility of Somerset Council, and we feel the Scrutiny Committee should be aware of that and nominate people to actually look at First services and report to the Traffic Commissioner. I see a lot of other things in this public pack which are part of our anger over the existing bus services. All of the things in that statement are urgent and need dealing with. But I think this committee needs to be aware of just how badly our services have got, how much worse they are still getting, and we are not fulfilling a service of providing a proper transport service. I speak as one who lives near Yeovil. Our Yeovil service has been reduced and reduced and reduced again twice this year. We need to find ways of funding and providing a bus operator who has the services of Somerset at heart.
Thank you very much. This is not an agenda item for this meeting, but I've got Councillor Rigby in the room and he'd like to make a reply. He's the Executive Member for Transport and Highways.
Jolly good.
Thank you. Can I just start off by saying that I'm given very strongly to the feeling that I'm back in the first year of primary school, because clearly we couldn't afford the chairs that went with the height of desks that we've got in this office. The exact opposite of Sedgemoor, where I was yesterday, where I felt like Gulliver perched up here somewhere. So maybe we can swap the chairs from here with Sedgemoor's and all will be well. Thank you for your comments, Tony. I've had a number of interesting conversations with Tony over the last few weeks and with his fellow campaigners, and I agree with much of what he said, that our goal when we took control of the council was to stabilise the bus service in Somerset. In some areas that's worked, in some areas, frankly, it hasn't done. We've had a number of occasions, fairly lengthy periods this year, where we've seen the percentage of missing miles, that part of the scheduled service that isn't delivered for whatever reason, rise to unacceptable levels. There'll always be a bus that doesn't work, and it takes some time to replace that, drivers that aren't necessarily well enough to drive. But we've seen on some occasions the missing miles get up to 6%. That's way out of proportion of what we would find acceptable. I've got a number of outstanding concerns about how the bus service is operated largely in Somerset by First, and I have a meeting in 2 hours and 41 minutes with the managing director of First, so I'll be leaving this meeting at 12 to go and have those conversations with him and to express our concerns and Tony's concerns and his fellow campaigners about how the bus service is currently operating.
Thank you very much for that, Mike, and thank you for your question. I think the next question is addressed to about the awards of contracts for highway services. So I'm going to propose taking that prior to that item coming up on the agenda. I think it'd be relevant to do so. Agenda item 5. This is the work programme and action tracker. This is Jamie Jackson to present.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies to the committee. The action tracker was only circulated late yesterday. The purpose of the action tracker is effectively to keep an eye on actions and agree sort of recommendations and areas of progress that the committee want to see happen. The action tracker will come to each meeting and will be red, amber or green, depending on the progress we have made on those. If an item listed comes to the committee with a green status and the committee is happy, then it will drop off the next time. And obviously there's a number of items on the tracker you've got in front of you with a green background, so they will disappear for next time. And obviously it's a good way of us keeping track of things that we may be finding challenging to progress. In terms of the work programme, we still that is outstanding at the moment, and one thing that I want to get finalised with service colleagues ASAP to give you a good idea of what's coming up. Obviously, we have already had the discussion about an October meeting, and the date will be clarified as soon as possible to members on that. The next meeting date after that, obviously, is the 22nd of November. And as part of that clarification to members, I'll probably try and clarify what we will be expecting on the November agenda as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions on that? Yes, Dave Mansell, Councillor Mansell.
See if I can work out the microphones we're not used to. Yes, thanks for that. Good to see the tracker and the forward plan work programme. In terms of the forward plan, normally the committee will and even other members will have opportunity to feed into that. So it'd be really helpful to have the forward plan, but can I also be a little assured that others aren't going to try and completely fill it and stop, anything else from being added in, because the committee should have some opportunity as well.
Absolutely, and that will be shared with the committee in a fairly fluid state, so that there is that opportunity, because as you say, absolutely, this should be the opportunity for members to contribute to that as well. And I do not want to see any scrutiny forward work programme as officer driven. It should be a good balance between member and officer.
Councillor Cravers.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, on the it was the highways responsiveness one. Funny enough, I got asked this not that long ago by parish council, actually, because it's something I'd mentioned, because obviously one of the things they do moan about, or sometimes the only thing they moan about, is highways. It says ongoing, and I think, was that the one where it said beginning of September or early September? Obviously we're now 20th of September. When is that task that going to be set up by that task and finish group? And while I've got the microphone, save if I would come back to me with regard to the future transport one that I saw was on the previous minutes. Again, do we have actual date of when that will be set up by? Because I do suspect that one, listening to the previous speaker and indeed the portfolio holder as well, that is quite loud, but not as loud as or important as the task and finish for future transport should be, because actually it's not necessarily just future transport. It's probably transport next month rather than transport in the future. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Any further comments or questions? Okay.
Could we have an answer about the when the first meeting is going to be of the task and finish group, which is supposed to be starting in September?
That's next on the agenda.
Can finish group.
I will need to have a discussion with
Sorry, it's the energy plan. Sorry, Henry.
I will need to have a discussion with service colleagues and come back to you all on that as well. Obviously, there is we do need to get that set up. Sorry, David.
Sorry.
Yeah, we can update you if that's helpful. When we talked about this, I think it was in June. Was it in the June committee meeting? Was it May? Forget. the scrutiny meeting at the time. We just to give you a view, the way that we deal with public inquiries and the front end of that process, which is where quite a lot of the interaction happens and the pass off between various services that sit in my area, and business support do that work for us. And unfortunately, the person, I won't name them, that organises that business support, so who was integral to the review of correspondence and the responsiveness of the service, unfortunately was taken ill and still hasn't returned at the moment. So we're in a situation where we need really to get business support services. We need to have the leadership back in there to be able to then have the conversation with the task and finish group, because at the moment, obviously, it's not really fair on them to say, can you come and supply information? They are the conduit by which most correspondence are answered, certainly via email to the services. So that's the reason we're not ready at the moment, and I think we'll have to hold on to that for another few months until such times as we're clear where that leadership is coming from.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we could be updated on what the situation is, so we know when we're actually going to start.
Thank you. Any other points? Okay, let's move on then. Agenda item 6, Somerset Energy Plan Task and Finish Group. I think Jacob Hall is going to present this one to members. Thank you, Jacob.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everyone. So I'm Jacob Hall. I work in the climate change team. I did come to the previous scrutiny prior to Unitary for Somerset County Councils to present on this. So bit of an update and also a request today for the scrutiny committee to approve a task and finish group to set up to review and feed into the energy plan over the next few months as we start to produce the deliverables within the aims that we've set out. Just to recap, so our project aims of the energy plan are to produce a high-level assessment of suitable renewable locations for energy across Somerset, particularly in regards to the development of the new Somerset local plan. Looking on top of that on our own assets and where those overlap with as well, and we'll be producing a GIS map showing those constraints and also those subjective constraints, so things like grid constraints. We're also going to be producing an investment and economic impact assessments, and then a roadmap of how we achieve our 2030 net zero target versus the 2050 national target as well. So we split the project into 3 work packages. Work package 1 has been taking place over the last couple of months, and so this is why we want to set up the task and finish group now. We want to start reviewing the outputs that we're creating. So work package 1 is around baselining, so what we've currently got and what we need, and around the mapping, so what the GIS mapping has come up with so far in terms of opportunities. Over the next few months, we're going to be developing the roadmap and the economic impact assessment, and those are really the 2 bits that we also want members to be feeding into as well. So we're looking at setting up monthly meetings for an hour, and we'll be circulating documentation around and ahead of those meetings as well for the members to review and come to us and feed back into. We have got an internal Somerset Council Officer Steering Group set up that are feeding into the process that had their first meeting at the end of August, and so we're looking at replicating that with members specifically to give you a voice to feed into the project as well. So happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Yes, Councillor Mansell.
Thanks. Good, pleased to see this. It's important work, so very pleased that it's progressing. So my only questions really are just a little bit concerning the detail of the task and finish group. It mentions that in the terms of reference that it may be comprised of approximately 10 nominated members, and there could even be additional ones on top of that as well. I've not necessarily got a problem with that, but I do observe that it's sort of it's perhaps unusually large. There's a guideline in the Constitution which suggests 3 to 5 would be a typical size, but clearly, there may be reasons to have more. And the other question is sort of part of getting on with it, and so I'm wondering when the members are going to be decided, and I can we even do it today? Those who are interested from the scrutiny committee, can we start taking, those who are interested and perhaps decide those ones? Again, fine with additional from the wider council membership, which the chair would decide. So that could follow.
I'll go back to Jacob on that.
Yeah, just on the size, the kind of around 10 was a recommended size in terms of the task and finish group for this project. We were conscious we didn't want to exclude anybody from it. Obviously, preferred members from scrutiny committee, but we didn't want to exclude wider members from it as well. So that was the reason we've gone for that. But obviously, we're not going to go too big, so it will depend on who volunteer. Originally, when this was a very packed meeting, we were just going to present and ask for volunteers to come forward post the meeting, but I'd have to pass to Democratic Service colleagues on whether we can start that today or not. I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that.
Councillor Hobhouse.
Mr. Chairman, could we get the volunteers today, now, and then we'll get the list put together and we can get on with it then?
I'm okay with that. I don't see why we shouldn't ask for volunteers now.
Yeah.
It's we've got a few more people in the room now than we had at the beginning, so it's a fair representation. So I suppose I ask for volunteers to join this task and finish group. Just oh, it's 3. Yes, you put your hand up to speak. I ask for volunteers. Sorry, before I ask for volunteers, actually, I would take more questions, because we've also got Councillor Michael Dunk online. I'll come to you first, Margaret.
Thank you, Chair. It was, yeah, I mean, as it happens, I can understand Councillor Mansell's concern that 10 people is quite a lot, because only, yeah, this is one subject that an awful lot of people have an awful lot of opinions on, and an awful lot of layman's knowledge, and then an awful lot of knowledge that maybe isn't correct. So maybe 10 would maybe help to balance that out a bit, but or not balance it out, or at least give everybody that opportunity. And I think this is quite an important topic. What I was struggling with when I was reading it was trying to understand what was excluded by the scope, because I don't know, maybe I'm just not bright enough anymore, but it was prescribing the stakeholders involved in the development of the energy plan. I was struggling to what is excluded from the scope, and to understand that. And the other thing I think was, because of course, how does this then feed into item 9 on the agenda with regard to the new local plan, and how will that work? Bearing in mind, it says here, a green and more sustainable Somerset. I assume by sustainable, are we including nuclear in that? Probably not, I should think. But I think that's probably my 2 main questions. It was, how, and I suppose another question is, how in detail are we going? Are we getting it down to the nitty gritty, or is this going to be real high level stuff? And for example, are we having wind farms or not, etc., etc. That's not suggesting that I do like wind farms, but you never know.
Well, Jacob, can you answer that?
Yeah, so around the scope, what we mean by that is we've already procured a consultant that with the scope, so we can share that with the task and finish groups to understand within the scope of the project. So it was to say that we can't go beyond that because we've already appointed somebody. In terms of your point around agenda item 9, I'd have to pass to whoever's presenting on that, I'm afraid. And in terms of detail of the energy plan itself, it's fairly high level. To go into the nitty gritty would have required a lot more budget than we have, and so we've gone fairly high level with our mapping. So it's not to say there is or there isn't wind farms, it's to say these locations are suitable for wind farms, and that's what we've mapped and we'll share with the task and finish group.
Thank you. Yes, please do.
And apologies if this is in the budgets, the other paper later on with budgets and things, but do you have, or can you let us know what the budget is of this group?
A budget of the project itself, you mean? Yeah, I can. So it was a combined budget between the 5 previous climate teams and planning policy teams, and it was just under £100,000 for this piece of work.
Okay, thank you very much. Just be limited to this committee, or would it invite others from outside? I mean, other councillors?
Yeah, happy to have other members members from outside this committee join.
Because I agree with what Marcus is saying. In a sense, there's the 10 could be a lot. In view of the number of task and finish subcommittees and committees that we all find ourselves on now, it's very difficult to volunteer for more. And I think a smaller unit, I think Dave mentioned that as well, didn't you? Might be more productive. But let's see who volunteers. So on that, I'll bring in Michael Dunk. Mick.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted a very quick question. Really. I mean, this is a really valuable piece of work, and it's going to be needed, as soon as it can be achieved. Really, the question I was asking was about assets, and I think we all assume this includes Somerset-owned land and Somerset-owned built assets. But does this scope include the commercial developments that various district councils and possibly Somerset County Council have picked up on the way before becoming unitary? So are they included? Because either just the ones in Somerset, if that's what's decided, or all of the assets, because we own them, we have a responsibility to, if they're suitable, I think, to put, say, solar on the roofs or whatever is required or presents itself as an opportunity. So would the officer be able to comment whether those will be in the scope or not?
Yeah, so I will check, but I believe it's all assets, but only in Somerset. We're not mapping outside of Somerset. But I will come back to you, just double check that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Mick. Yes.
Just 2 points. One, yes, I mean, this is one of many pieces of work. A lot of the work we do has to come together in terms of informing the local plan in response to Marcus's question. And agree with the point Jacob's making, apart from we do kind of classify certain things as commercial investments. So we treat those as commercial investments with that slight caveat to what Jacob was saying.
I'm going to ask, I'm sorry. Okay, Adam Boyden. Councillor Boyden.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to check that the high-level renewable energy assessment will not exclude the potential for solar on roofs, be it commercial buildings, residential south-facing buildings. There'll be a high-level assessment of that. That's obviously a big potential there.
Yes, all solar opportunities. Yeah, not just solar farms on buildings as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any more? Yeah. Okay. Well, I think this is a really important and influential task and finish group, actually. So what I'm going to suggest, unless there's any great objections, is we open the up to this room, this committee for volunteers to start with, and then see if other people, Michael Dunk's online, or anybody else, any other councillors would like to be in it. And I'm prepared to say, despite what's been said, maybe up to 10, on the assumption it might not get that far.
Yeah, happy to be led by you on that. That's absolutely fine.
I mean, I don't know if any other councillors suggest, you've made alternative suggestions. Do you object to, well, I think I probably came across as being against 10, where actually I was just suggesting that it could, I haven't got any objection to going up to 10. I'm putting my hand up, by the way, as volunteering first.
Are you?
Like,
what's task and finish groups?
What about?
I might as well achieve something as a councillor.
I laughed. Dave, would you have any great objection to that ceiling?
I'm okay with 10. I was just
I think a slightly smaller group would be ideal, but let's go to that. So can I ask for volunteers? I mean, you're most welcome to consider this at length and then get back to Jacob on it. But can I ask for volunteers in the first instance? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Keep your hands up.
Yeah, keep your hands up, please. Well, it's a healthy group already. Councillor Ashton online. Well, okay. I don't know how we're going to decide if anybody. That's 8. We've got. I don't know how we're going to decide to keep it down to 10. I'm quite wrong on that. I think we might have to ask for volunteers, but limit it within each party grouping. if we have 15, for example, come forward, we might have to ask the party to nominate their chosen candidate. I think that's okay, isn't it? I think that's all right. Yeah. Okay, Jacob, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I've got another question. Oh, yes, okay, go on.
Yeah, I'm just curious because obviously you said we've got a consultant in place and I don't want to name it because it's in the report. But was there much, I mean, how did we choose a consultant? Was it was a procurement process and yeah, basically how they marked and how did that work?
Yeah, so we went through the procurement process through Somerset County Council. We had a group of officers from planning, assets and the climate change team that came up with the project scope, questions, and then we put it out to tender and we had 7 or 8 different companies bid and then went through the evaluation process looking at the quality of questions they provided, previous work that they'd done in the area as well, and obviously price as well.
Thank you. I'm ready to move on now if everybody else is. Agenda item 7. This is awards for contracts for highway services. We do have a public question from David Redgewell. Is he online? Yeah, there's somebody waiting. Okay, if you're there, David Redgewell,
and
would
they
you
also
like to ask a question now?
local
Thank
fixed
you.
line routes, bus routes. So it's really interesting for both services that the operators are able to see whether there's impact on their services. Lydney, as Louise will tell us later,
got some
also
crossover there.
additional via the ride and other community transport services. If we can look a little bit more in depth at the
About that, we've got a cross
which is
line
the area we're going to look at in more depth, has a total population across the area of 80,000.
We've got social services that have been included in our meeting, but I'm sorry if you're listening, David Redwell. I'm very sorry you've got a cross line there. Would you like to ask your question now? Okay, if he comes back on, I'll come back to him. All right, let's move on with the presentation then, and I'll bring him in at the end if he's back online. Right, is Sarah Stanistreet here? Oh, she's online. Sarah, are you taking this one?
Oh, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. I think it will be Mike that will be taking us through, Mike O'Dowd-Jones.
Okay, sorry. I saw you sit down. I didn't realise why. Okay, thanks, Mike.
Morning. Good morning, members. Mike O'Dowd-Jones. I'm the Highways and Transport Commissioner for Somerset Council. I just wanted to give you a run through of what we're doing with our suite of highways contracts, for a new suite of contracts for highway services. There are a number of decisions coming formally to executive over the next couple of months to award contracts. So we felt it was a useful opportunity to update you on the overall strategy, I guess, behind these contract awards. We won't be going into the details of the contract awards themselves today. Those are in the confidential stages of contract awards, so we won't be able to dig into the details, but obviously those will be considered by the executive at the appropriate time. So next slide, please. So we have an existing term maintenance contract, we call it, with Milestone Infrastructure, and we have a separate contract for highway lighting at the moment, and both of these are due to end on the 31st of March next year. We've been through a long process of trying to understand the best way of delivering these services to come up with a procurement strategy and a delivery strategy, which I'll talk you through. The upshot of it is that we're going to replace these 2 contracts with 5 new contracts. So we're going to break down the highway maintenance activity into its kind of sensible sub areas. So there's the more routine highway maintenance, which covers activities such as grass cutting, emptying drains and gullies, providing winter service, particularly the winter gritting service, and the emergency call-out service, 24-hour service that we run, which is obviously incredibly vital for the authority. At many times in the year, particularly we have storm events or flood events, you know, where these are the contracts where people go out and move trees out of the way in the middle of the night, and also deal with flooding issues. So they're very important contracts. So that's the highway maintenance contract, and that's the first one that's coming up for discussion at executive next month. And then we have some contracts that we will be awarding for the main areas of treatment. So the surfacing of the highway. So that involves a lot of activity in terms of going out and structurally, digging out the highway and putting in new surfaces. Surface treatments. So this is more around the kind of surface dressing type activity where you do tar and chippings to maintain the lifetime of the highway. And then a separate contract for new highway assets. So at the moment, we sort of mix up the maintenance activity with the creation of new assets, and actually they're very different types of activity, very different sort of cost pressures, etc. And we're finding we're not getting a great deal of cost predictability using the maintenance contract. So we are planning to set up a bespoke new assets contract for the creation of new works. So this would be new crossings and cycleways and that sort of thing. And the aim of that is to get greater cost predictability. And then finally, we'll be awarding a contract for highway lighting, but we'll also be wrapping in, now that we're a unitary authority, a wider set of illuminated and electrical assets that the new Somerset Council has to maintain. Next slide, please. So just by way of background, what we're actually trying to achieve here, we've done quite a lot of work on our really ambition for these partnerships going forward and our objectives, which I'll talk you through. So the broad ambition is really, first off, covering the basics well. We really want good basic service out there, good quality, good value for money, good social value to be realised through the contracts, and then particularly a big emphasis on trying to reduce carbon emissions and deliver environmental improvement through the works. So that's what we feel are the basic things we want to see. We're very keen to get more of an intelligent clienting model going here. At the moment, we have outsourced quite a lot of the decision making in terms of the nature of the programs and the standard of the works done. So part of the reason in breaking the contract down and having that wider range of people delivering for us is so that we can bring back in-house some of the guiding mind behind some of this stuff. So we'll be strengthening our asset management team in-house. And then obviously there are some very keen ambitions that we want to see in terms of getting more investment in Somerset and working with these organisations to attract more funding into the area. We really want to see commercial arrangements that work for us, that drive genuine innovation. So quite often you find yourself in difficult contractual relationships where it's a lot of time is spent dealing with disputes, etc. So we're really trying with these contracts to avoid some of that, and so we've simplified them. We've put in less stuff that you could have a dispute about, if you see what I mean. So trying to avoid lots of complicated key performance indicators and things like that, and actually just looking at the basic service. So we hope that we'll get contractors on board who are making a reasonable margin for the work that they do and not tied up in a large number of disputes about various matters. So that's the hope. And then obviously, as I've said, working more directly with the supply chain. So this is quite a key ambition for us, so that we feel at the moment, because there's a kind of management layer that's outsourced between us and the current supply chain, that we don't at the moment have those direct conversations, and quite often we miss some of the innovation and new ideas that supply chain has. So that's really what we're trying to achieve by breaking this down and contracting more directly with people. Next slide, please. So the commissioning intentions for this work, I think I've talked about most of this actually in the previous slides, so I won't go through this in detail. Yeah, that's probably more or less a reiteration of things I've already said. So if you could carry on to the next slide. So the commissioning process that we've been through. We're obviously aware that this contract was coming to an end next year. So we've done a lot of work in the run up to that, starting back in 2020, actually, looking at our options. There's a wide range of ways you could deliver these types of service. And we had reviewed all of the options using a Future Highways Research Group options toolkit. So this is kind of an industry standard piece of work that a lot of highway authorities are doing. So it really looks at all of the in-house options, all of the options for external delivery, outsourcing, having arm's length delivery companies and those sorts of things. So really wide range of options. And that led us to the conclusions that we've got about how we want to do things that I've just laid out for you. We had a long, hard look at how we did the previous contract and learned some lessons from the things that worked well and things that didn't work so well from that, and we built those in. We've undertaken a value for money review, again using a sort of standard toolkit that authorities have been using. And then we did some market analysis. So we employed a company to go out and talk to the market to see what they were doing, whether there was an appetite for delivering services in our area and delivering under the sort of models that we were talking about. So that really demonstrated that there was a good alignment between what the market was trying to do and what we wanted to do. And then we went into some market engagement. So we invited all of the large players in the highways sector, and well, anybody was invited, but we invited the large players and they were all there, but there were also some smaller companies and some more local companies, and really talk through what we're trying to achieve, and then that enabled us to optimise our approach. And we also had a peer review process with Hampshire. So Hampshire, obviously, quite similar to us in terms of the sorts of things they're delivering. They're a bit bigger, but generally have the same issues and pressures. So it was a very useful peer review process that we learned a lot from in terms of finalising how we were going to set out our contracts. And then we prepared the contract paperwork, and now we've spent the last 6 or 7 months going through the process of inviting tenders and evaluating them. Next slide, please. So, yeah, just to reiterate what the objectives of this were. So we are going to be gaining more control over design and delivery and a stronger client asset management team and a stronger asset management approach. This is all about selecting the best standards and locations for treatment. We'll be getting that more direct relationship with the supply chain, reducing the outsourced management of subcontractors, and enabling direct discussion with the supply chain to get that innovation through. Going to have more bespoke arrangements for the delivery of new asset schemes, looking at greater cost predictability. We have specified this to enable us to incorporate a wider range of unitary council services as we go forward. I think the actual scope is very highway maintenance focused at the moment, but has an opportunity to be flexible and introduce new services through discussion and negotiation with the contractors. So if we decide there's a particular area of unitary council service that's relevant, that would be best delivered through these contracts, then we can do that in due course. And then we've got some explicit requirements within these contracts for carbon reduction. So we put a massive emphasis in the evaluation and selection process on the ability of these organisations to deliver reductions in carbon emissions. We've really looked at their track record in terms of their ability to participate with us in this. And there are some really good ideas coming through from the tender proposals about how to reduce emissions, both in terms of innovative materials, new working practices, alternative fuels, greater efficiencies. There's a wide range of things that are being considered in order to reduce carbon emissions. So that will be a really good part of this this service delivery going forward, and something which we've been really keen to build in. Next slide, please. this just sets out for those of you who may be newer to the council and others, the service dimensions. That it's just to reiterate that this is the largest asset that the council owns in terms of its scale and its value. There's some big numbers there in terms of the size of the carriageways that we're maintaining and the footways. We've got an equal amount of rights of way as we have to carriageway almost, and a large number of structures, bridges, drains, etc. So yeah, a big service, and I just wanted to get that across to people. And then next slide. Yeah, just going to some into more detail about the decisions that are coming up. Because we're having this stronger client asset management and design function, we are 2Ping some staff back in from the existing contract. So that is happening over the next couple of months in advance of the start of the new service next year. We are then going to have a series of contract awards. So coming up first is the term maintenance contract, which will be considered by executive in October. So that's an 8-year contract with an option to extend for a further 4 years. And then coming up in November, executive, we will be subject to having completed the necessary due diligence, which we're currently in at the moment. I think we're currently on track, but yeah, so I'm confident those will go to November, but if we don't, then we might need to sift them out a little bit. But those contracts will be the surfacing, surface treatments and new asset frameworks, and the highway lighting contract. There will be a new collaboration board put in place to manage the coordination between all of this work, because obviously there's a big task to do there in terms of if you break things down and contract directly with a lot of organisations, it's then how you make sure there's collaboration and coordination across that activity. So there will be a new board put in place with all of those contractors sitting on it with us to do that collaboration and coordination. Next slide, please. This is the final slide, just to give you an overview of our highways operations at the moment and the highway managers who deliver the service. Next slide. So I think that was probably it. Yeah, that's the final slide. Thank you for listening. So I'm happy to answer any questions on any of that. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, I'm going to the committee for questions first. Bente, Councillor Height.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I almost got a nervous breakdown by seeing that you were touching highways, lightning, etc., because I rely a lot on working as a good councillor for my community. I need highways and I need to be able to get hold of them. I'm full of admiration for the emergency people that turn up all hours. They are really doing a fantastic job, and they are always happy and they're always cheerful when you come across them in a dark evening. So I'm full of admiration, but I would ask you, please, 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 the minute you have decided who is doing what, will that be sent out? So for instance, me as a councillor, I know exactly who I am to get hold of now. I also think that regarding potholes is an expense that has been dragged on far too long. I know it's not your fault. I know that it's subcontractors, but in the future, there must be somebody in Somerset Council that knows about tarmac, that knows how to do the job properly, even if it means you have to employ your own group of 5 men that can come out and then make something that lasts more than a year. It is very frustrating for taxpayers as well. So please provide with as many information about the people you need to contact to get them out, and then also keep it within so taxpayers are not going to feel so sad about all their money going for new potholes. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so I think I appreciate with a large number of contractors coming on board, this could be seen as an increasingly confusing picture, but very much it's about strengthening the council's in-house service, and then for those people to be dealing with the contractors. So very much communication will be via the Somerset Council Highways team, and we will make sure the contact numbers for those people are well advertised, and so that people know who they can get in touch with within the council. Also, we will continue to have the emergency duty people who can be contacted at 24 hours a day, and there'll be clear lines of communication into those people. So don't worry, there will be clear communications, and it will be through Somerset Council rather than you having to go to contractors. In terms of the yes, the ability to do the work. So we've selected these suppliers based on their track record and their ability to deliver these types of works. They are all specialists in their areas, so we have been reviewing the quality and their ability to deliver as part of this process. So we don't have any concerns that they are not appropriate resources to be delivering this work. Thank you.
Got Alan Bradford first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of questions. First of all, your grass cutting will be an improvement on what's happened in the last year, because some of the verges and things that have been done, it's intolerable. And when you leave it so long, there's only one thing going to happen when you do cut it: the drains block, and that's another 6 weeks to get the drain cleared. And that's how it goes on and on and on. This rewilding, is it becoming law? Because it looks absolutely dreadful. We even got town centres with bits of that now, as well as the villages. That's the first question. Thank you. The second one is, I was in touch with Clean Surroundings at Sedgemoor beginning of the week. I didn't hassle Councillor Mike Rigby because he had enough hassles down at Minehead, and after seeing him last Saturday night after a bike ride, that was enough looking at me. So I went to Clean Surroundings, and I questioned the fact that none of our side roads in lanes anywhere at the moment are being sprayed the verges. You might have pavements there and you've got curbstones, and the verges are extending the width of my book and twice as much someplace. You can't distinguish the verges from the foot of rubbish that's growing out the side everywhere. So when it rains, what happens? You all know that. The things that drains just don't work. Now, Roundup has come into the question. I did question somebody a year ago on this, actually. They said that they were going to start using vinegar. I know the cost of Roundup has doubled in the last year. Being a farmer, I use a bit of it myself, not much as I used to. And it looks atrocious. But what Clean Surroundings told me, they had contracts to do all the A roads and certain little way into the villages, but not all the way down to the roads that matter, because some of this is getting in an atrocious state. It really is. Especially here, we just had a growthy year with a lot of rain, and it does look awful. If you want to see something, go from the main road, A38, to North Pedant to North Newton. And if I had 50 sheep, I could keep them on side the road quite easy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bradford. I've got two. Sorry, Mike. Hey, sorry. Oh, David, sorry. Dave.
So yeah, I feel I should answer this one as the Service Director for Infrastructure and Transport rather than Mike, who does the commissioning. So you're asking very specific questions, Councillor Bradford. So on grass cutting, this has been asked many times, and I'm not apologising. I'll give you the answer that's actually on our website. We do 2 cuts, and we cut effectively. We don't cut all of the verge for trying to maintain some degree of species rich environment. So we cut the first metre or 2 metres depending on what the road is. You can see on the website we say which lengths of road we do. We try and do the first cut between about April and June and the second cut between August and September. You're absolutely right. Sometimes the growth rates are different in different parts of the county. It just depends on the weather. But obviously, when the contractor is instructed to do those 2 cuts, they can't do every road at the same time. They have to start somewhere with the gangs they have, do the lengths of road that we've prescribed. Minor roads get 1 cut, again, sometime between June and July, because that's what the policy set out. And I'm not here to defend the weed growing. That is a consequence of a conscious decision that was taken years ago, that we would only weed kill noxious species, which we have a legal duty to do. And this is true of many authorities who have stopped spraying weed killer on just generally uninvasive species, grass, etc. So that's the reality of what we are, and that's what we're funded to deliver.
Yeah, I want to. No, it's all right, but I just on the issue of Roundup, if I may interject, I understand that it's highly carcinogenic. We shouldn't be using it.
You mean sorry, Chair, do you mean glyphosate?
Sorry? Dangerous chemical, and it's something we should be avoiding to using, as far as I'm aware.
Discussions come up before, Chair, about glyphosate, which is included in Roundup. There is. I'm not going to say there's evidence. There is a suggestion that you can find information that says it's carcinogenic. There is other information that says it isn't carcinogenic. We still do use glyphosate because it's the only thing that we can use on noxious species, which we have a legal duty to get rid of, Japanese knotweed, etc., and ragwort. So those things we do use glyphosate, but we use it very limited and very sparingly, and obviously not when it's about to rain, on those particular species. As I say, the rest of it, we've stopped spraying weed killer generally on verges and channels.
Thank you for that, Henry.
Mr. Chairman, I have a whole series of questions on the different contracts. So I'm going to start off by, on the highway maintenance contract, are we looking at letting this internally, or are we going to be going outside? And have we done the figures on the internal teams and the external teams? And why, what is the difference in price? Because at the end of the day, we've got certainly 3 teams in the districts who have been doing this job for a long time. And frankly, I don't think they need replacing.
Okay, I will take your question.
So we deal with the last one first about the ability to in-source. So the contract that we're letting for term maintenance is an outsourced contract to a contractor, but there is no guarantee of workload, and therefore progressively we can decide whether we deliver internally or externally. Those conversations have started to happen between services, between my service and Sarah Dowden's service, who are communities they deal with the public realm, to decide, particularly in urban areas where they are very active, whether or not, take grass cutting for example, that the DLO would do the grass cutting for highways. So those conversations are already happening. We'll come to a view about what's optimum. We will obviously have a price, Councillor Hobhouse, for grass cutting, to take that example from our contractor. We can then compare it with what the in-house cost of that might be through the existing DLO. So those moves are afoot, and we'll see where it fits best in terms of both service delivery and financial efficiency.
Sorry, I didn't tell my mic off. I think it's important that we keep some form of DLO, because in 2014, when we had the floods on the levels, our team were working 20 hours a day out of Loughton. And if we don't have them, and we have another series of floods like that, you've got no staff to do anything.
I don't think there are any plans to cut the DLO. I think there's long-term plans to probably reinforce the DLO and its role.
Okay, moving on to the next contract, which for me is the potholes. The 2010 contract had no guarantee in it of the quality of the finish of the potholes. And for 7 years, we lived with a contract where if they came up again, they got paid twice, if not 3 times, to mend those particular potholes. I'm sorry to say I have a little bit of knowledge, which is probably a very dangerous thing, but I could spend a lot of money and mend a pothole permanently, so it never needed touching again, by using hot tarmac, bitumastic, and proper cleaning out of the pothole and cutting the edges, all of which will give you a permanent thing. I understand you need to do the cost of work out which is the most cost effective way of doing it. So my first question is, what is the guarantee going to be on the potholes on the new contract in years?
So on the new contract, it is the same guarantee level as the old contract. So you're right, if a patch is being cut in, inlaid into the surface, we would expect that to last 3, 4, 5 years before we surface stress, etc., or resurface permanently. If it fails, and we obviously have a record that we instructed the patch to be put in or the pothole to be filled. I think filling potholes is an unfortunate term because it's a bit more sophisticated than that. We have to cut into the sides and we lay possibly 2 different sorts of material in the said pothole. So it's a bit more complicated than just pouring a cake mixture into a hole. And if they fail, we get the contractor to come back and do it again, which we often do. I think maybe what you're referring to, Councillor Hobhouse, is that because we were inundated this year, particularly in March and April, with huge amount of potholes, we allowed a temporary fix called ViaFix, which does look like putting a cake mixture into a hole. It's an epoxy-based material, but progressively through the summer, we've been taking out and retrofitting proper patches, hot mix patches that we put in over there. But of course, I think everyone hopefully would accept we had no choice. We have a statutory duty to fill potholes so that you can transit the road. We had to use ViaFix as a temporary measure until such time as we caught up and started putting hot mix material back into those holes. So that process is ongoing. It's obviously not helped by the weather we've been having at the moment, but we did catch up pretty much with where we should have been by the end of August.
My understanding on the 27 extension of the 2010, you brought in a 2-year guarantee on pothole filling. Is that still the guaranteed period, or are you looking at 4 or 5 years?
I'll check specifically what the contract term says. I'm not sure it's so cut and dried as 2 years or 5 years, Councillor Hobhouse, but we'll check and we'll respond to you in writing.
Thank you very much. The second question I've got on that specific subject, and every single councillor here will have seen it. You get a pothole which is marked in blue because it was done 4 weeks ago. You then get, you know that the pothole filling, sorry, wrong term, the pothole mending team will be coming out. If then you get another one done at the week before in red, they deal with the blue one, they leave the red one because it's not been marked out or agreed to be filled, wrong word again, agreed to be mended. So you end up with the team coming back to the same point 4 or 5 times. Can we please have some system which allows them to fill the new potholes when they come to do the old potholes, so they're only visiting a site once?
So the answer to that is yes. And this year, so if you just go chronologically, Councillor Hobhouse, we were inundated. We couldn't keep up with hot mix fixing of potholes, and the different colours is to do with the categorisation of the level of defect. So therefore, you're right. You might often see red or yellow writing and blue writing. One's a category 1 defect, and the category 2 defect. So there has been this issue, and the lead member has had the same discussion. We got some additional funding from the DFT, about 5.4 million, a proportion of which has gone into exactly that, Councillor Hobhouse, which is going to areas where, although the statutory defect isn't quite deep enough to classify it as a class 1 defect or category A defect, we are now taking the steps to fill the other ones at the same time. And that's all because we've had more money from the DFT to do that particular piece of work. So yes is the answer, yeah.
Great, thank you. Have you got one more?
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
I'm willing to be shot down at this point. As far as I know, hot filling is a lot more better. You don't like the word filling. Using hot material to mend potholes is considerably more permanent than cold filling. And the sealing of the side of the pothole with bitumastic then waterproofs it, and you don't get ice frost lift on that hole. Yet, if you look at the CO2 levels and the carbon levels, that is nearly 3 times, I think I'm right in saying, the CO2 value, because you've got to keep the material hot and you've got to do all the rest of the stuff to go with it. Are you concentrating on lowering the CO2 or more permanent, I can't think of another word at this point, fill of or mending of the potholes? Because the two are completely diverse in the way they operate. For me, The more permanent filling means you haven't got to come back, and that is cheaper in carbon terms than having it lifting after 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
There's a lot in that.
I know.
I'm trying to unpack it a bit. I think, I mean, I'm maybe not answering your question, Councillor Hobhouse, but yes, there is a problem we have with highway maintenance in general in terms of the amount of carbon that we use, both in transporting material, embodied in the material. I mean, you are effectively burning diesel to lay bitumen, and you're heating it up with gas. So it's not exactly a sustainable thing. Mike's actually leading a project that we have called Live Labs, which is looking at decarbonising our highway maintenance overall. That is the type of thing that we will be asking our contractors to do. I think the other problem we have in a damp climate is that we also use gas to dry out the hole before we fill it. So there's another bit of carbon that comes in. That may be doable with electric dryers. We're seeing more and more electrification of plants coming in. We'll see what's possible. And that's exactly, Mike, if you want to comment on the Live Labs trial.
Yeah, I mean, just to add that, I think what we want to do is quantify the issue and say where is carbon emitted throughout the whole process and over the whole lifetime of an asset. So from going to maintain it and then how often you have to replace it in the future. So exactly the thing you're saying, there'll be a balance, and I think the idea is to assess and come up with the best solution that has that best balance over reducing the emissions in applying the material and then reducing the emissions over the lifetime of having to go back and repair it. So we will be analysing that and coming up with the best option. But I think that there's a lot of new materials coming out and a lot of new innovation. So I don't think it's necessarily going to be as straightforward as a colder mix is less has less longevity. I think these new products are going to hopefully balance out the two, but we'll work it through in an evidence-based way.
Come back just on that, and I've finished. Could you please bring the results of that back to this committee in a paper so that we all understand what the balances you're having to do to achieve the results?
Yeah, I mean, this is a 3-year programme we're running, so it might not be back to the committee very soon. It's a lot of complex stuff to analyse, but yeah, certainly over the period of this project, over the next 3 years, we can certainly bring something back. Yeah.
These questions are very specific, but I'm letting them run because as you're in the process of awarding, we're in the process of awarding contracts, it's all quite relevant. And as councillors, this is something that arrives on our doormat all the time. So if this seems a bit detailed, I think it's quite important. I'd like to move on to Mike Rigby because he wanted to come in on that.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to remind members that the Live Labs programme was something that we bid for, and we were really pleased that we ended up with, I forget, was it £5 or £7 million, Mike? Remind me.
5, Councillor Rigby.
£5 million. There were only a few councils across the country that were awarded this money. The idea is that we go out and trial various methods, and we've picked several different types of route across the county, rural, urban, large, small, so that we've got a good cross-section of the kind of roads that we are required to maintain. And that money will be used to trial in partnership with a couple of other councils to trial these new methods that we hope at the end of the process will be a bit of a trailblazer for the rest of the country to follow. So it's a really useful thing that we've been able to do, and my congratulations to David, Mike and the rest of the team for being successful in that bid. And I hope that it's something that will, at the end of that process, give us here and lots of other councils a really good indication about how we're going to maintain roads in the future, because for all the reasons that we've heard about gas being at the foot of pretty much everything, we need to move away from that. We need to do it quite quickly.
I'd just like to add a supplementary question myself, if I may, there, and it's maybe something I should know, but when government funding comes to this council, does it take into consideration the sheer quantity of roads?
I can give you a bit of an explanation on that. I might call on David to add to it. Yes, in a nutshell, the length of road is part of the factor that the government uses to hand out money to local authorities. So Somerset has one of the longest stretches of road, if you like, total road. It's 6,600 kilometres. It's not as much as Devon. I think Devon has the most of any council in England, but we're pretty close to the top. That is taken into account. I think one of the difficulties that we have is that in recent years, government has chosen rather than giving local authorities any real autonomy as to how they spend their money, it's incredibly prescriptive. You get to bid for a pot of money that does a specific thing, and then they're even more specific about what you do with that money when you get it. It's not a particularly helpful way of operating. I've started to characterize it as really not being local government. We're delivery agents for central government because they tell us exactly what we've got to do with every last bit of money. And that I think will need to change in years to come. But at the moment, that's the situation that we have to operate under. David, I don't know if you've got anything to add in terms of how money's allocated.
Yeah, so that's generally, Chair, capital spending that Mike's referring to. So there's a formula that the government have for length of road, state of the road, etc., which they look at all highway authorities, and then they grant us capital grant for maintenance, for highway maintenance. What the government doesn't fund us for is revenue maintenance. That's done from our own sources of funding, from council tax, business rate, etc. So over the years, obviously the squeeze on revenue budgets has meant that we try to capitalise as much as we can, because that's the budget the government gives us. But it's also difficult, given revenue budgets over the years, to do the day-to-day maintenance. Something I think Councillor Rudd was talking about in terms of drainage clearing and gully clearance, etc. So the idea is you have enough revenue maintenance that your capital works over 5-10 years. You have a steady state of asset life. That's the theory of how it's supposed to work, and that's what the government fund us the capital funding for, but they don't provide revenue funding.
Well, thanks. So I've got Marcus, then Edric, and I see Dave, and Gwyl Wren is online. So let's move on, please, Marcus.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm getting more befuddled as the questions came on, actually. I would like to just point out that other weed killers are available. Doesn't have to be Roundup. Seems to be getting a lot of mentions lately, but there's an argument over which one's the best, I suppose. And apologies for if some of these questions aren't quite agenda. Well, agenda led, more about the presentation, actually. But while we've got both David, Mike, and Mickey in the room, I think it's worth maybe sort of asking some of the questions, because and I think one of the questions I sort of you touched on was the decision making more in-house. So that means it's outsourced, and I wondered how that actually worked with the outsourcing of decision making. And so then who decides? I've got another question here which I just wrote down, which was who decides on the on highway servicing? Who actually makes that decision? Is it an outside consultant? Is it somebody inside? Another question, and I won't come back again. I'll just get them all out of the way, I suppose. Things like, obviously, we've got these contracts here. Things like, I don't know, the Coombe Lane in Withycombe. There you go. Got it in a scrutiny meeting straight away. We talk about how many roads we've got. Well, we've got half a kilometre less now after what happened at the weekend. And so when things like that come up and a road not quite disappears, but it's not really a road anymore, it's more of a, I don't know what it is, but it's not, it needs sorting out and sorting out quickly. Where does that money come from? Do we have a contingency fund? And then is that done by one of the contractors, or do we have to suddenly go out on a quick bidding process? I was trying to get my head around that, I suppose. I've talked about, and you talked about the supply chain and dealing with them more directly. By supply chain, do you mean the actual contractors, or do you mean, I don't know, people who make streetlights? There's probably a streetlight. Well, I know there's a street lighting exhibition, or used to be. Is that what you mean there? And I suppose I'm going to leave the rest because I'm conscious of time. But I'm looking at this and all the effort that goes into this contract, into these contract awards, etc. At what point do we get to the stage? Well, actually, if all that effort was into running our own highways maintenance department that did it all, would it be a better use of public money than actually spending all our time and energy, and all your time and energy, awarding contracts that actually, if we weren't awarding the contracts and you were getting best value doing in-house? I always assume maybe we're legally obliged to, whether that's a political decision that's been made in the past by others. So I wonder what point are we getting to? And, an example, Somerset Building Control Partnership, fantastic, get making money. it was doing very well. So I wonder where we are at that point. And are we at a point where we just go out and buy a company that's already doing it and take it in house? There you go. There's the questions.
Quite a few questions there. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, I think so. We're between the two of us. We start with your last question first because it then leads nicely into all of it, because you started at quite a detailed level and got on to very strategic. So we will answer it the opposite way if that's okay. So the decision was taken for strategic reasons, actually to have more control, so that we'd have more, if you like, client side. There's a discussion about an intelligent client. The previous contract we had, which predated, certainly predates me, and Somerset Council had a very, very outsourced contract with Atkins, I think 20 odd years ago, Mike, and we've progressively moved towards more in-house. So that is a direction of travel, a journey. To go full in-house, you'd have to be absolutely sure that you had the management capability to run a contractor. Now, you'd be relying on people coming from the existing contractor to you to be able to do that. That is a step beyond where we think it was reasonable to take a risk. So we've ended up in a situation where previously the previous contractor had a large overhead, so that they did the 4 contracts in one. That's effectively what they did. So we've disaggregated them, and that means that we save on the management overhead of the contractor, because we are instructing what were subcontractors. So there was a surfacing subcontractor, a surface dressing subcontractor, and they often subcontracted capital works, new build capital works, like building a footway cycleway was subcontracted to a local contractor. So if you remove the management overhead and you go direct to those contractors, you save a lot of money, maybe 5–10% of the contract cost, depending on what the management overhead is. And we now need to take on the programming of that. So we previously did the design work. So our asset management team would explain, to answer your first question, what needed to be done on our network and where. That then went to our current contractor to design, and they then designed it, they booked the road space, they programmed the works, and they went out on site. What's changing is that we're going to do the design internally from our asset management's instructions, and then we are then going to individually to the surfacing contractor say to them, here's your program of work for next year, and we'll talk to them about when they can do it, but we'll be responsible for programming it on our network, not the contractor anymore. So those are the kind of fundamental differences from the way we did it last time. It is a step towards in-housing more, but moreover, I think what Mike introduced in his speech was that we wanted to have more control over what we did, and also particularly on design, for example. Live Labs is a good example, to be able to do design differently and try different things, to be more efficient, and also to see if we can reduce carbon. So does that answer your 3 questions?
I think it did. There was the question about where things like accumulating, where they can fall into existing contract, etc. Money side and who does it and how that works. I mean, and I suppose, it's like, and then designing. I suppose when you talk about designing, I don't want to mention individual companies. No, I'll leave it at that for a minute, but that is particular how that then works.
So
into the existing contracts you got.
The photographs you sent me. Yes?
I'm doing my bit as a division councillor and getting it out there.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, those.
Yeah, I think we move away from individual cases on that, but did Mike Ruby want to say something?
Very good example, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, okay.
I'll just respond to that point that Marcus has raised very briefly. I, by coincidence, about 4 weeks ago, when the weather was very much better than it now is, walked up Coombe Lane to Withicombe from Carhampton, and marvelled at the vast amount of new drainage infrastructure that we'd installed about a year earlier. None of it is there anymore. It's pretty much all been washed away. And I think it's an indication of the fact that we aren't going to be able to engineer our way out of the problems that we've got. There's going to be a degree of adaptation required, short of some massive national programme to increase the capacity of our drainage systems, which would involve, frankly, Californian-style storm drains in some locations. There is no engineering solution to this. So we'll look at Coombe Lane and try and get it back into action as quickly as possible using our own resources. But I just want to get the message across that with the kind of weather that we're having now through climate change, engineering is not going to get us out of this.
Thank you. As I say, that's a general comment rather than a specific one. Are you coming back on that directly, Henry?
I was stationed in the army for a year in Hong Kong. They've got the biggest drainage system you can have on their highways. They seriously flooded this week. And I mean seriously flooded, like nothing we've had in Somerset. And trying to engineer your way out of any of the climate change is not possible, even if you're a Tory.
Well, we try not to make politics too much of an issue in this committee, but thank you for your observation. I'm going to go to Edric.
Thank you very much. I think the conversation's moved on where I was going to mention some things, but I'll just leave it to one point. Under the new contracts with maybe the highways teams, who do people go in check on the status of signs, etc. in terms of overgrown road signs? You know, I know we see our maintenance guys out in small vans, because I frequently find myself on what we know as the Mendip motorway going out chopping back vegetation from important signs such as stop signs and chevrons. And I'd like to see in terms of maintenance things that sort of snagging done, so people like me don't end up doing it. Or do we just report that through Fix My Street and then wait 6 weeks for it not to get fixed and have a major collision at a crossroads? Thank you.
Yeah, so this is a regular discussion, and it's complicated by the fact that quite a lot of the hedges where the signs that you're referring to are not ours and they're cut by farmers. So we can and we do, where there is a sign obscured and a farmer hasn't cut the hedge, we do cut them back. We have the power and authority to do that. We obviously don't necessarily have the resources, the manpower and the funding to do it everywhere. So I actually saw an email exchange this week, Councillor Hobbs, which is on exactly this question about enforcing the duty of landowners to cut their hedges that are adjacent to the highway. It's not straightforward. Some are very good, some are pretty lax. So the answer is we do. And if you report it online, we will go out. If the resources are available, we will go out and we will cut that back. I think everyone would accept there's probably not enough of it from 20 years ago when it was probably much done more routinely. So it's just a consequence of the amount of resource that we have to deploy. But yes, if you've got one, please report it online and the team will get round to it.
Yeah, I think, Ben, did you want to come in on this point?
I just wanted to say that in Shepton Valley, we've got a lot of houses where the owner thinks that they can now let everything that grows in their garden grow wild. So it grows wild on the pavement, so we can't walk there. Now, I did not invent anything about growing wild. I think it's despicable that our old township and man, it looks like a tip. But I will say that when I can't walk on the pavement and it is hanging over my head and my glasses fly off, I grab hold of that offending branch and I pull it down. I will take photos out in the open and I'll send it to highways and they will get to us as soon as they can. But inside the town, if I can't get hold of the owner, I will just pull it down or break it off, and then they will have to come out and get it. And that I have always been told by Mendip officers that I'm not breaking any law. So rather me than highways.
Good, thank you. I'd like to talk a little bit about ownership later on if we've got time. I think it was Dave Mansell who's next.
Thanks. Yeah, I've got questions in a couple of areas, both to do with the strategic objectives. So we've touched on some of them, so I'll try and limit it down. I think the first one will be on sort of the commercial aspects, and I will start by saying that the intelligent client, I like the sound of that. That, you know, that I'm pleased that you're doing that. Give us a bit more control and understanding and input into the design of things. Long term, I tend to incline to having things in house, but do accept it's not as simple as that these days, especially when you've lost it and no longer have the management ability. So you're heading in good directions. There was something in the report, it's page 25, and it talks though about maximising income from commercialisation, which sounds like something else. So I did wonder what exactly that meant. So if you could let us know a little bit more whether there's something even further to this that isn't clear to me, at least so far. And still, though, in the more general area and the intelligent client and the way the contract's working, I did just wonder I'm sure you've done risk assessments. I'm wondering what risks might arise from this. The fact, though, that we're not guaranteeing work suggests that alone gives us quite a bit of control, although I don't know how, but anyway, perhaps if you could just say, are there any risks that we should be concerned about with this newer approach? But clearly we've had problems in the past. Is there anything we need to keep an eye out by changing things that we might be exposing ourselves to? So that's one, sorry. And then the other one, you won't be surprised to hear, is in relation to the carbon ambitions in terms of reduction. And yeah, good. I'm pleased to see a 50% reduction, especially for this type of work where it's clearly challenging and the work does need to be done right. And you told us some about this, so you may have already sort of touched upon most of it already, so that's fine. But is there anything else in terms of how that carbon reduction aim of 50% might be achieved that you could also let us know about? And very finally, I realise that part of it is how the vehicles are going to be fuelled, and do just wish to check where we are with that, not least that we can now see the missing bit of the slide from our pack, where electric 3.5 tons, and we've been on this before. What is meant by the alternative fuels for larger vehicles in this context, please?
Yeah, and I might need to draw on Dave Peake as well for this. So just to give Dave the heads up, who's online. So I think commercialisation is an ambition, and we had it in the last contract as well, but it didn't really come through, where we asked for proposals for how the contractor would help us generate some income from the assets. And something we've done ourselves, for instance, recently is start to introduce advertising on roundabouts. It's making use of the highway asset for an income stream, but that's something we've done ourselves. So it's that type of thing, really. It's how do you get an income? And I don't think we're talking about huge sums, but we did ask the question through the process, and it was part of the evaluation criteria. It wasn't something I personally evaluated. I know they scored, we've scored each of the contractors on this, and the preferred contractor will have scored reasonably well on this as part of that process. But Dave, is there a flavour of the sorts of things that you're aware of that have been discussed under commercialisation without going into enormous amounts of detail?
That's right. I think it's as you say, it's things like the sponsoring things like roundabouts and vans and vehicles and things like that and so on. That was very much the sort of thing that was coming through. Also, working with the local communities and so on, and spreading the word out as to what we're doing and so on, and working with communities and the like.
Yeah, and there is a specific offer on commercialisation from the contractors as part of the tender process. So what I'll do is, I think once we've gone through the process of awarding the contract, and obviously certainly the ones that are coming up for executive, I'm very happy to set out for the committee what the commercialisation offer is, so that you can see, in detail what actually will be there, because there is a clear offer. Unfortunately, I'm not well enough briefed on it at the moment to have gone into that level of detail, but we certainly have the information I can supply.
You talked about risks and carbon. So if we do risk first of all, we had a piece of work done by a firm of external lawyers who were reviewing the contracts. This was about November 2022. And they identified that a key risk for us was having the institutional capacity to do the programming necessary for the 4 contracts to work together. So we were aware of that risk. We've been working on it and proposals. One of them is to have clear visibility of the works programme, both in the next year and the year after. That requires a bit of getting ahead in terms of what we're going to do. Marcus's question is the obvious one. Well, those sort of things happen. We have weather events which we have to do. So there's a balance between how much we can plan to do and through programmed works and how much we have to react to. We never probably have enough capacity to react across everything that happens, but we obviously do our best. People work long hours to do that. So that was the main risk, Councillor Mansell, that was identified, was the ability for us to programme. So one of network management, because this all works together, it's not just highway operations, everything has to work together. Network management under Bev Norman are looking at a GIS system where both members and officers can see the whole programme of works across the whole network. And that will have dates and times, etc., when we're going to undertake works. We're also trying to do that to aggregate, perhaps, developer works at the same time as we do a resurfacing scheme, so we only go in once, and that will help because we're going to put on all planning applications that are coming up in Section 106 agreements, etc. So there's a broader piece of programming work we're doing than just the strictly necessary program. And I hope that gives you a bit of confidence that yes, we understood that and we knew that we needed to get better at it. It's a constant problem in terms of people asking us, why is this road being dug up? Did we give prior notice, etc., etc. On carbon, I'll just give you a statistic, Councillor Mansell, which was surprising to us when Mike and I heard it from some of the experts that are involved in our Live Labs bid. About 60% of the carbon in highway maintenance is just vehicles moving people and stuff around. It's not actually materials. So you asked a very good question, and I'm going to take the opportunity, Councillor Mansell, to share with the Scrutiny Committee that there is things that we can do, but it will require behaviour change both on behalf of the public and ourselves, and it obviously requires a political decision whether we want to go down this road. One of the things that would reduce carbon is a concentration of works in a particular area, because you obviously don't have to move the plant around. You also can potentially have mobile recycling plants where we plane out the material. We put it in a friendly farmer's field. There's a machine that recycles it all, and we lay it down. That would obviously cut out a huge amount of journeys to and from the quarry if we're recycling on site. But to make it efficient, you have to have a concentration of works. So the point would be that we might in 1 year do a lot in South Somerset as we're here today, and do more in the West area 1 year and more in the East area. But the way we've structured the resurfacing contracts, it's very much for the contractors to tell us how they might achieve that. We will then work back with you as members to say we could reduce carbon on this scheme, on this programme by 20%. But you will have to accept longer works, for example, because the sections that we actually do works at the moment are quite short. Obviously, longer sections mean longer diversions and more encumbrance for the public. But I'm afraid there's a balance to be struck. If we want to reduce carbon, we probably have to accept some of those things as a net consequence of doing it.
Dave, do you want to come back?
Well, yes, part of it's not been addressed yet, but thanks for that. Gives us something to think about. So I perhaps won't explore some of the thoughts that proceed to mind, but yeah, clearly something we should potentially look at. And often, if things are programmed in and you can see what the logic of them is, and you know that you're in stages, it becomes more acceptable and the change can be done. But there's more to it than that. So interesting, and sounds like a discussion that should happen. Could I then just on the last bit on the fueling of the vehicles, which it sounds like where most of the reduction may be expected.
Yeah, so again, we've been agnostic, which is why we use the word alternative fuels in the descriptions we used in the contracts. And the way that the contract works, you've got this target of 50% that we've put in there. It will be for the contractors to tell us how they're going to achieve that, and us to accept their proposals or not, as the case may be. So the cause celeb of HVOs, for example, we've concluded that we aren't going to accept HVOs as carbon mitigation, because it's actually trucked around in diesel trucks. It's a bit strange, so we're not going to accept that. But we will look at alternatives. All the vehicles that they have to use under 3.5 tons, they'll be probably electrified. We made that a requirement in the contract. We will work with them to put infrastructure in place in the depots to enable them to be charged, etc. But for the above 3.5 ton vehicles, this is the knotty problem that we have as to what is the alternative fuel source for that. Is it electric vehicles? Is it hydrogen? Probably in the timescale of this contract, we'll come to some conclusions of what works and what doesn't work for that. But again, concentrating the works helps if we have to carry on using diesel for the foreseeable future, certainly for heavy vehicles, obviously reducing it overall. but that's where we meant on alternative fuels. We are agnostic. We'll see what they say, but we have to reassure you, Councillor Mansell, we have the right to say yes or no to the proposal.
Yeah, very quickly, if I may, that's okay. Let's see where it takes us. Pleased to hear you've got the yes or no, and pleased the position you're taking on HVOs, because I think that is the right one, and that's an example of how you can get it wrong, and how in the past in Europe we got it wrong on diesel vehicles and made a big mistake, and signs were a big mistake, or perhaps a smaller mistake was being made on HVOs. So the yes or no is important. And the last bit on that, just demonstrating that, because I've raised that, I read the biomass strategy, which the government published earlier this year. It might have only been during the summer, and they've said HVOs are not right for transport in there. A little bit, it's a paragraph, but quite clear for the reasons that have become apparent. So there's often more to it, and carbon's important and a big driving factor, but sometimes there's something else going on as well, and you can be causing a bigger problem elsewhere by too narrow focus. We have got to keep the wider view as well to make sure we're not making a mistake, because that can happen, and it's not easy. So I'm on the whole reassured and interested to see where it goes. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Alan Bradford, was that a separate question, or did you want to supplementary to what's just been spoken? Is it supplementary to what we've been talking about? Okay, I'll bring you in afterwards then. Dixie Darch, did you want to have a quick come in on that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just I want to kind of follow on from what Councillor Mansell has been asking. I think it's, you know, we're kind of in early days around carbon reduction, regrettably, and there are those kind of wrong turns, if you know, that have kind of happened. So I think we have to be fairly flexible. What I'm really pleased about with this contract is that we know what is deliverable in terms of carbon reduction, and we've explicitly asked for it. It's not just a kind of procurement process where we say, you know, we'll choose the contractor who's going to say what they're going to do around carbon reduction. So, you know, we think that 50% of carbon reduction over 8 years is doable, and vehicles under 3.5 tonnes can be electric. So I think we're being really proactive in this, but there is that kind of fluidity and negotiation within the contract, that if the contractors feel they can do things in, you know, in a different way to save carbon, we can go with that. And I think that point about the distance travelled by vehicles versus making them electric, especially when you factor in the embedded carbon of a new vehicle, I think that's really an important one. Often it's about logistics rather than snazzy new stuff. And as David Carter was saying, there may be impacts on that in terms of how things are done, and that's kind of a political decision, and it's stuff about behaviour change and helping people understand how things go. But, you know, as we move forward, if you just think about potholes and the weather that we have been driving here, the old business as usual model kind of has to change. I don't think we can do things in the way that we have been doing, really. Thank you.
Right, thanks. Now, before we go, I'm not going to take, I'll take some more questions from the floor later. We've run this for a long time. Wouldn't have had time for the water debate, would we? So I'm going to go to Will Wren, who's online, and then to Mr. Redgewell, who's been waiting a very long time. So Will first, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll try not to detain you too long. Very interesting to see this, and I think as a councillor from a rural ward where highways are something that always comes up in parish councils, we'd be looking for a significant improvement. I mean, I spent this morning trying to update my list of highways issues, which I started a year ago, many of which are long-term standing, and not many have been solved. So we're looking for a significant improvement. One point I would be very interested to know is if the streetlight contract is going to the existing contractor. I'd be very disappointed, because the service we've had from that has been truly appalling. So as I say, we're looking for service improvements. Now, the mention was made of an intelligent client. Well, I'm always a great favour of intelligent client, but I think that does include councillors as well, because we need to understand what the service standards are, what is achievable and what isn't. So I'm hoping that as part of this package, there will be a full briefing for us so that we can be part of the communication of what's going on. I think we all understand that one of the biggest frustrations is poor communication when people don't know what's going on. So it was really interesting to hear about the GIS proposal so that we can, in as far as possible real time, actually begin to understand when a job is going to be done. Also, I think the prospect of aggregating jobs in a particular area is useful. But if you're going to do that once every year, then if your job's down in year 4, then we might have some problems. But I mean, I'm sure we can work through that. Back to the service standards, I would hope that there are sufficient penalties to keep the contractor up to the mark. As we all know, the previous contracts have drifted a little bit, and I'll leave that one there. But of course, the most fundamental problem is budget. And I would like to know whether the budget we have is just fixed and will get taken up on a first come first served basis, or whether there is a more nuanced way of calculating what we're going to spend on highways, because clearly we don't want to spend all our money by the end of September. That would be a disaster. So I'm hoping that there is some sort of management in there, that actually there is liaison between ourselves, our officers, and the contractors involved. And the final point I want to make is that we must support this internally with appropriate members of staff. All our highways teams are struggling. I mean, they've got so much to do. They're running around, and this is part of the problem. So we do need to get more staff resources in. As in the flood team is ridiculously under-resourced. As last weekend saw, these events are not uncommon anymore. In our part of the world, we're still waiting for the Section 19 report to address the problems, and that kind of information is integral into what highways works follow on. So if we actually don't understand what the problem is and the cause of the problem, because we have a resource issue back in the council, then it does make addressing them in the longer term or the shorter term much more difficult. Anyway, I'll leave it there, and thank you for the opportunity to talk, and I'll watch this with interest. If anybody wants to come back on some of the points I raised, I'll be very interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. The answers, please. Well, let me go with Mike Rigby first.
Thanks. I'll just make a general point about budget. Councillor Wren's raised the issue of budget as a key constraint, and he's absolutely right there. It's something that we continue to bang the drum for with government. I was up yesterday at the House of Commons doing the same thing there. The problem is that on the current trajectory, within a couple of years, Somerset Council will be a care hub. We'll have enough money to do adult social care and not much else. And every other council, upper tier council, is in the same boat. So we are all between us lobbying government to change the way that local authorities are funded, all the way that care is provided. It can't carry on as it is. We'll continue to do everything we can within a very constrained budget. This council spends 63% of its entire budget every year on adult social care and children's services, and that leaves all of those other, which are frankly universal services, all of those other services fighting for a share of the remaining 37%, and the social care element rises year on year. So that's the picture, that's the environment that we're operating in, and that will continue to constrain the ambitions that we might otherwise have.
Well, thank you. Do you want to come back?
It's just on Gwil's service levels. I think that the service levels for the new contract are broadly the same as the old contract. There are penalties and incentives in the contract. I think that again, there's always a caricature of service delivery, that it isn't sufficient to what most people would think. I think we're highly aware of that. 25 years ago, it was very different. We had far more people and higher funding. So Councillor Rigby's just told you that to a degree, the service is a function of the resources that are available. And I think that to manage expectations, whilst we would hope the new contract and contractor will be, will adhere to the contract. I'm not sure it will fulfil fully Councillor Wren's expectations of an almost on-demand service. We do programme and we can share how much money we apportion to reactive maintenance. And as Councillor Wren said, sometimes, yes, that is spent up by September because of events that happen. We end up in a situation where we still have to provide the service from a statutory perspective, so we end up overspending. That's just the nature of the way the service works. We have a bad winter. So we do allow a proportion of our spending for reactive maintenance, but some years it's enough, some years it's not. But that's just the nature of the way that we're funded and resourced.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move on and
Martin, I beg your pardon. Can I have a reply on the point of a briefing for councillors so that we can be part of this process going forward? I think that would be very, very helpful if we understand what the service standards are and where we can help. I'll leave that there, but I'd like to leave it with David Carter if we can do that.
We've got an answer on that. We're okay with that. Yes, it's been approved. Calling Mr. David Ridgewell, who has been waiting on the line for a long time. We did try and get hold of you earlier, Mr. Ridgewell. Are you able to present your question? If so, could you give me 3 minutes, please? Thank you. Maybe you've got your microphone off because we can't hear you. Question hasn't been submitted. We can't hear. So what I'm going to suggest to you is, if you could write your question in the chat box, that would. Oh, you're probably on the phone, I think. We can be in contact. Please send in an email or a letter, and we'll answer it then. Thank you. I had I think two more people wanted to speak to the floor on separate issues on that. I'm nailing this discussion. It's been very valuable, but very long. So Alan was the first. Was there someone else? Oh yeah, Marcus. Okay.
Well, actually, brought up floods, etc., Carhampton area on the weekend, and we had a lot of publicity last week. But the Hollycut Estate and Councillor Kravis and Councillor Rigby, the junior estate. Any news on that? Did that work? Did all them logs end up in one heap or not? After, because the volume of rain you had. Can you fill me in on that?
I think what the estate has done there is to try and put the river back to the conditions it might have been in before it was engineered. The idea is to slow the flow of water between the upper reaches, the steeper slopes, and the sea. Now, I haven't seen what's happened in Bossington. I think it's Horner Water, isn't it, and the River Aller in particular that they've been working on. But I'm not aware of any particular flooding issues in those areas. So, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, I think what they're doing has worked, although the aims of their project are wider than just flood prevention. There's a whole habitats and nature conservation element to it as well. But in terms of flooding, I don't think anything particularly happened in Bossington. So, yeah, I'd say it was a success.
Thank you, Marcus.
I'm very impressed with Councillor Rigby's knowledge. Very good. Got his finger on the pulse. In fact, the first I knew about it was going to be on BBC Breakfast was when I saw it. So, yeah, I'd just like to say, first of all, thank you, because obviously, this is almost, it could have been a one-item agenda meeting really to have a chat with you or etc. So thanks for that. Thanks for your answers. It was on the carbon reduction, actually. I thought Dixie obviously, put the point across, and we get back to get back to Henry's potholes and carbon reduction. At what point can we sort of think about carbon reduction credits? I mean, obviously we've got all these skills we've discovered with phosphates, and once we just solve that issue, maybe there could be, is there a way we could do mitigation? Because one of the things that we can talk about potholes and we can talk about how we do them, etc. But obviously the public, as was shown, it's maybe why one party is thinking of rolling back on some other environmental policies in the near future. Don't really care. They care about the potholes sometimes. So how can we do that? And one question, and we talked about street lighting here, and it's more of a getting back to the basics again. Sorry about that. At what point are we to having street lighting that is no longer needed to be connected to the grid and to you know, individual street lights that will actually do the job and actually not require electricity. So therefore you got a carbon reduction there. And so there could be that whole package. I just more of a question on out of interest really on that one.
Yeah, interestingly, the Live Labs program that Councillor Rigby was talking about that we are part of, one of those Live Labs projects elsewhere in the country is on precisely on highway lighting and how you create an illuminated environment without having to spend energy on it. So I think, again, it's a 3-year program, but there should be some learning from that becomes the industry standard in due course. So yeah, high hopes in 2 or 3 years' time, there should be some really good innovation there that we can learn from.
Thank you. Well, I really commend the department on managing to get some high percentage of LED lights into street lamps. But we seem to be, technology seems to be moving on even from that. But we've come a long way since I first became a county councillor, and we were just replacing the bulbs that were glowing with LEDs, and now we have a policy which actually recognises it's actually cheaper to go through the more. Great. So thank you for that. I think we're there on that meeting, that particular agenda item. I'm going to, sorry, Dixie.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to come back quickly to Marcus about kind of the mention of carbon credits. I think it's probably a conversation that is not to do with highways, but certainly we're very aware of opportunities, particularly around biodiversity net gain and county own land, and we're kind of looking at that. There's a lot going on with the ANOBs as well around kind of blended finance on nature recovery projects, and there's lots happening, but it's early days, and obviously the kind of phosphate mitigation issue is a bit up in the air at the moment until we've got further clarity. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. I'm sorry, I can't take any more questions. It's appropriate, I think, for us to take a 5-minute break if we can make it as quick as we can before we deal with the last 2 issues. Thank you. Okay, 1 minute, please. Yeah, sure. Eventually. Assume they're right.
You're right, Adam. It sounded like you collapsed.
What happened? Chair give way, did it? Thank you, everyone. I'd like to carry on with the last 2 items of the agenda, please. I'm sure the officers will be in a minute if they need to be. We'll call them in if they need to be asked questions. Okay, moving on. Item 8, which is budget monitoring update, and I think Christian Evans is doing this. Oh, there he is. Sorry. I didn't realise you'd moved.
Yeah, sorry, I moved from over there. Thanks, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name's Chris Evans. I'm a strategic manager in finance. Hopefully there's a couple of slides. Steffi's going to just pop up on the screen there. Excellent, thank you. So this is the climate and place budget monitoring position, month 4 to the end of July. From an overall corporate perspective, the forecast outturn is predicted to be 26.1 million overspend. The majority of the overspend relates to adults and children's services, as was kind of mentioned earlier by Councillor Rigby. From a climate and place perspective, the forecast outturn shows a £2.7 million overspend against a budget of 87.7 million. So that represents about 3% of the budget. But this is actually an improvement of 2.4 million from month 3. From a waste perspective, so with regards to waste services, the forecast is an overspend of 800,000. Waste services were able to negotiate an improved pay award shared with Suez. So this provided further pressure on the budget, as you should imagine, but actually, however, it did avoid strike action. There was additional impact of the King's Coronation too, and there's been an increase in residual waste and both curbside and recycling centres. Highways, there's a forecast of £1.3 million overspend in highways due to increase in safety defects, which is kind of mentioned as we've gone through the morning, and that's across the whole road network. And there is a 400,000 predicted overspend in economy and planning. This is a once-off pressure due to how the funding from DWP can be applied to the apprenticeship levy. We can move on to the next slide, that would be great. So some of the key risks, future issues and opportunities. So as you would guess, at the moment, contract inflation is a huge risk. Certainly some of the larger contracts such as highways and waste. So for example, 2 of the contracts in waste have indices relating to October and February. As you can imagine, inflation at the moment is extremely high. This will have a knock-on effect to a lot of the contracts that we have. The impact of cost of living crisis at the moment with spending habits and decreases in income budgets will probably have an effect on the income and expenditure for the economy area. Staff vacancies across the whole authority at the moment. There is a lot of difficulties in recruiting permanent staff. Obviously, this then puts a greater pressure on the costs for agencies. As you can imagine, they're far more expensive than employing them yourselves. And as has been discussed this morning, one of the key risks is change in the climate, lots of flooding, highways, icy conditions, and safety defects, which obviously do cost a considerable amount to fix. So happy to take any questions on the paper.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes, Councillor Hobhouse.
First one is a point about the actual document, page 8, whether it says this has been driven by unusual mild damp weather this year propagating plant growth. Propagating means you're breeding, and they need to use the word increasing plant growth. You check your dictionary, Jamie, if you want to. The second one is much more important. I cannot understand where we knew that we were going to have to do a highway contract, that we had to put an extra overrun in the budget because we should have budgeted for it of 0.2 of a million in month 3 to do the data for the highway contract. It seems like one follows the other. If you've got to do the work for a highway contract, you should have budgeted to have the money to do the data for that contract. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
I would like to know why it wasn't in the budget.
That's a highway question, really, isn't it?
Yep.
Mike's gone. But David might want to answer that one.
You've got an overspend of 0.2 of a million in the budget this month due to having to do data work for the highway contract. Why wasn't it in the budget at the beginning of the year when you knew that you were going to have to do the highway contract?
So it's a fair question. And the answer is that because of the way that the directorates, or certainly my service directorate's been structured, previously the funding for that came through commissioning, and it wasn't an operational function. Commissioning doesn't exist in the same sense anymore within the directorate, so it's been pushed together. So there would have been an overspend. We just didn't know where it was going to be. So it ended up manifesting itself in the financial year, and it's effectively through the operational budget. Because at the time we didn't quite know what the cost of it was. We had some consultants work that was being done. But the cost is to help us mobilise and demobilise the current. So demobilise the current contract and mobilise the other 4 contracts. That's where the cost is going. We didn't know at the time what it was. Because we were asking consultants for a price, so we couldn't price it at the time. But equally, as I said previously, it had been part of a commissioning budget, and now it's part of an operational budget. So it's ended up being an in-year pressure.
Thank you for the answer. Any other? Mansell and then Marcus.
Okay, yeah, I'll try to be quick. Thanks for the report. I might have a little chat afterwards if you're still around, or we might go to just on the presentation of the tables and the charts. There's good, they're good, and you know, pleased to see them. It always helps to have something visual. Possibly it might help to have something for some of the other service areas in addition to waste as well. So maybe that's something that could be looked at in time. I won't say any more than that on that one. So under risks that exist, contract inflation's mentioned, also contract disputes in the waste area. Is it possible to give us sort of briefly a little sort of outline of where those are? I may have some ideas, but I don't entirely know. Or could we be supplied with a short briefing on that, so we're aware what the contractual disputes are around, and also staff vacancy levels, difficulty in recruiting permanent staff. Could you let us know are the particular service areas where this where this applies, and which are they?
Anyone want to answer? Would you like to answer that first?
Probably Mickey might need to mention the disputes. Obviously, it's difficult in an open meeting to discuss contractual elements, but I'm sure we can provide a note if need be. From the tables and charts, thanks for the feedback on that, much appreciated. Certainly, as we bring in the 5 budgets together for all of these legacy councils, one of the things we are looking at is the key performance indicators. So we are looking to extend these. What this actual report stems from the executive report, which is quite a full report. So, but yeah, certainly as we develop the new budget monitoring process and the report that goes with it, then certainly we'll be adding some more key performance indicators with obviously Nikki and the team. And vacancy levels probably something Nikki might want to pick up on.
Nikki.
So yeah, so we'll probably do a note in due course, but the commercial issues, as Chris rightly says, wouldn't want to go into too much detail now, but they're primarily the ones we were talking about with the waste board before, in terms of our collection contractor, reflecting the kind of commercial pressures there. So lots of work behind the scenes in terms of making sure we're kind of analysing those and getting to a conclusion. So we'll do a note in due course. There are some other things around kind of when there's been new change in legislation in terms of POPs and persistent organic pollutants, which more affects the other side of our contracts that clearly we're working through with our other contractors in terms of making sure we protect the public purse. The vacancy question, I mean, I think there are particular pressures pressures everywhere, but I think the particular pressures are in kind of the areas which are reliant on more professional skills. So our planning service, our building control service, aspects of engineering, anything to do with flooding and water, quite frankly. So I think, but I describe them as areas of acute pressure, if you like, because actually it's just across the board as well.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, Marcus, I do beg your pardon.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at this table here on page 7. I mean, actually, you look at the highways overspend in this. What is it, less than 5%, 4%, 3%? I mean, it's possibly in today's world an absolute result. Yeah, I mean, it's just, you only have to look at how much everything costs, and I think that's probably, probably a relief really. My question, I suppose, was touching on that one with the staff vacancies, but simple question is, it's got economy and planning, then it's got economic development. I'd like to know the difference between economy in the economy and planning bit and economic development, just out of a technical thing, I suppose. With regard to staff vacancies, are we losing? I mean, am I right in saying, is it tier 3? Has tier 3 now been done and tier 4 not been done? I never quite, or is it T4 that they just still don't quite know what's going on? I mean, how far, and is that actually costing us? Are we struggling with staff retention because that hasn't been sorted yet? And is that then costing us more money in agency fees? And should we be putting more efforts into that? It's more of a question than it is a genuine question, that because obviously how much the agency staff cost us. And I think, what Mickey said about planning was, I think that'll probably come up in the next item actually, with regard to planning officers, et cetera, and the lack of them, should I say. But it's more general, that tier 4, is it that we're on the general restructuring? Thank you.
Well, a good point. I'm not sure if there's anybody in the room that can take that one up, to be honest, about staffing. And is it? You can, Mickey. Okay.
Yeah, so in terms of the table, what we did have a kind of internal debate about whether we presented it a different way. What you're seeing is kind of almost the legacy way that table has been presented, almost as different functions, which might have been ex-district, ex-county council, come together. It's not, especially in that economy, employment and planning area, it's not particularly helpful because it doesn't reflect so it reflects legacy rather than any kind of real split of services. So I think Chris and I will look at that and kind of present that in a clearer way, which makes for next time. In terms of the restructure, yeah, we're kind of going down through that cascade. So there was a consultation over the summer across climate, environment and sustainability, economy, employment and planning. Clearly infrastructure and transport, largely with the exception of some bits around car parking and a few other bits and bobs, wasn't changed. But yeah, so that consultation is concluded. And so I think over the next few weeks, actually, we'll be kind of progressing through that recruitment process. Clearly, anything that creates uncertainty has risks, in terms of staff. But I think in terms of that broader question you're asking about, in terms of agency, actually, it's thinking about each service in its totality. So planning has a specific set of issues that we want to deal with, but actually you look at that as transforming the planning service overall, not just, you can't tackle the agency problem in isolation, if you like. But yeah, so ongoing work.
Thank you. Sorry. This might apply. I'm another question, just about going forward with this in terms of waste management. We've got a pilot scheme at the moment, which I've been involved in Frome, of collecting extended hour recycling, where we get another blue bag, it looks like a polythene bag, and we collect the cellophane and the wrappers. And has that been factored into the waste budget for next year as a rollout across Somerset?
No, the reason that hasn't been factored in is that was a fully funded trial. The original intention was that we do it small scale, as you say, so it's about 3,600 properties on the outskirts of Frome. The original intention had been that, a further scaling up of that to, say, about 15 to 20,000 properties would happen next year. By the third year, extended producer responsibility reforms would have come in nationally. So the whole county would have effectively been funded. So we're always clear that absolutely something we really wanted to do. Not something you can't just collect it without having the rest of the system, the reprocesses working. So that was why we had to do it as part of a national trial. But B, frankly, we don't have the money to do that unless the producers are paying for it. Clearly, with kind of delays that were already happened in introducing those policies and what may or may not be announced but nationally kind of later today or tomorrow, there's a big uncertainty about the future. So the reality is, if we don't get the funding, we haven't got the money to roll it out further. But if we do roll it out, it would be on the basis of it being fully externally funded.
Thanks for that. Shame if we can't carry on with it, but I understand. Any other questions? No, right. Well, thank you very much for that. Thanks for the report. And we can move on to item 9, which is approach to local plan and statement of community involvement. Is it Laura and Andrew who are going to do this? They are.
afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Chair. I'm Andrew Redding, so I'm a Principal Planning Officer in the policy team. I'm here with Laura Higgins, who is also a Principal Planning Officer in the policy team. So we're going to be got two short presentations on both the statement of community involvement and on the local development scheme covering the timetable for the local plan. I think they're ordered slightly differently in the agenda pack, so the other way around. So if you're looking for the SCI report, it is page 91 onwards, just so people can follow. So in terms of statement of community involvement, so this is going to both these documents are essentially precursors to preparation of the new Somerset local plan. The key documents which we legally have to get in place before we commence preparation of the local plan in earnest. So the statement of community involvement itself, so essentially it's requirement we prepare it under the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004. It's a document which essentially sets out how the local authority will engage and consult with stakeholders and the local community on planning matters. The important thing is it relates to the full council functions, so not just the local plan and preparation of policy documents, but also the development management side of things, so the determination of the various plan applications which the council is responsible for. Next slide, please. So just to set out a bit of a background and context, so the reason we need to prepare one is at the moment, we essentially inherited the 5 statements of community involvement of the former local authority areas, both the county and the districts. So we have separately adopted statements of community involvement. They were prepared at very different times. They cover different topics because district and councils obviously had slightly different planning functions previously. So there's essentially a need to prepare a new document which covers the new unitary's responsibility on planning. So in terms of background, the draft statement of community involvement as a document went before Executive Committee of the County Council on the 18th of January of this year. That was for a decision to consult on the draft document. Following that, we had a 6-week public consultation with the communities. It was a public consultation. And it was accompanied by a number of training sessions with parish councils and agents as well, planning agents, in terms of raising awareness of the document. And it also, as part of that, we also consulted with the former planning committees of the councils, so the planning committees and regulatory committees of the districts and the county council previously we also consulted with. I think important thing to set out is that it is a high-level document, so this won't be the end of documents which the policy team prepare on consultation engagement. There will be more focused documents on particular areas of work. So the local plan, for example, colleagues are currently preparing a more detailed communications and engagement strategy, specifically about local plan engagement. So the key thing is this is a high-level document setting out the full requirements over statutory consultation across the whole planning function in terms of context. Next slide, please. So in terms of consultation undertaken, like I said, it was a 6-week public consultation we undertook in spring between February and March. Included both public consultation generally, but also with local groups, parish, town and city councils, agents, and the committees I referred to previously in terms of the former planning and regulatory committees of the councils. In total, we had 164 responses. That included both good mix of local residents and businesses, planning agents, parish, town, city councils and other groups. Also included useful comments from a number of stakeholders, so statutory consultees on applications, or other stakeholders involved in the planning process, such as the OMB unit and Environment Agency and Natural England and the like. So the final draft document, which is what we're looking to take now for adoption to executive, is essentially supported also by a consultation statement. So I will summarise some of the key changes we've made to the document in response to the consultation, but that consultation statement runs through all the comments in terms of officer consideration of comments and where we've considered and made appropriate changes to the statement of community involvement in response to those comments. Next slide, please. So just to go over some of the key changes we made to the document in response to the consultation we undertook. So in terms of the introduction section, it did refer to the importance of engagement with parish, town and city councils and local groups in the document already, but a lot of the comments came back was the need for that. There was a key importance of that in all aspects of the planning system. So we've made that very clear up front in the introduction over that expectation that we will do that with local groups and local parish, town and city councils. So that wording has been strengthened. In relation to the equalities and diversity section, we've amended that to be much clearer in terms of consistency with the now Somerset Council's equalities policies over making documents available. So it now reflects that wider policy over making document available in large print, easy read, audio and braille formats. Again, it's around addressing what our qualities and accessibility duties are around making sure that our policy documents and other planning documents are accessible. So in relation to conservation, there some comments came through on this. This was an interesting one in the sense that we don't currently legally need to consult on changes to conservation area boundaries set out in the legislation. But it's fair to say there's an expectation that, which came back through a consultation, that we should be engaging appropriately with local communities, not least to local communities understand their area, they understand the heritage elements of their area, and so we've included wording in the document which will be clear that appropriate local community engagement will happen, not least just to fact check what's being proposed over things like amendments to conservation areas. Next slide, please. One of the key things which we came back from the consultation is the area which has probably been amended the most is around pre-application engagement. So this is essentially describing what the council's expectations are for developers and planning agents to consult with the local community on proposals before formally submitting an application. That's now been strengthened, and it's been sort of very much in plain English terms said that consultation is expected to be genuine, and it should be early enough that it can genuinely inform planning proposals on that front. We've also, now that they've been adopted, been clear in the section around pre-application fees, which we charge in terms of pre-application to the council itself, and the key point that parish or community schemes are exempt from those pre-application fees, because obviously we want to be encouraging community schemes of benefit to be able to go through that process without being subject to fees. In terms of how we consult, one of the feedbacks came back from parish councils was around sometimes the statutory timescales for applications doesn't always align with when parish meetings are, over when they're expecting, when they have their planning meetings to consider applications. So we've included a section on that, which essentially happens in practice across all planning areas, as my understanding is that officers will be pragmatic and be able to agree extensions of time where parish councils need that to be able to make substantive comments on plan applications. In terms of how to comment on applications, so this was more of a point of consistency in the document. So we've made it very clear now in this section, which aligns with the equalities section, but comments, yes, people can comment using the planning online service, but making it clear that comments can also be made by email or post, and the details be provided on site notices and notification letters. That comes again back to that point about making sure that we're not excluding anyone from the process in terms of people with poor broadband connectivity or the like still being able to make their views heard on the plan application process. Next slide, please. So one thing which came back, which was not included in the draft document, was around the process for planning committee, in terms of the arrangements for planning committee, things like public speaking and the referral process to planning committee. That was because at the time the constitution wasn't agreed in terms of the constitution of the new council. So in the final draft, we've included a section on that, so it's signposted to the constitution, is clear regarding what those arrangements are. So people looking at the statement of community involvement are referred to the constitution and can understand what the process is in terms of decision making. There's also a new section on planning enforcement. So some comments did raise the point of the importance of planning enforcement, and but it should be referred to in statement of community involvement. This varies between different councils. Some councils do include their enforcement information in the document, some don't. given we've now got a new enforcement policy for the new council, it's quite easy to just cross-refer to that in the document, which makes sense. And we've also included details of how people can report a breach of planning control in the statement of community involvement. And then with regard to appendices, so the appendices in the document essentially list statutory consultees and specific consultation bodies for local plans and plan applications. There's been some amendments there in response to feedback received. For example, the point was raised about, whilst it's not an exhaustive list, there isn't representation on that list from horse riders in relation to transport. So we've added that. There's also new organisations such as Active Travel England, which have emerged since the draft was prepared. So there's been a need to make sure that list is up to date to reflect current legislation over statutory consultees and applications. I think that's the end of section on STEM community development. So I'll pass over to Laura now to just go over the local development scheme and timetable for local plan.
Thanks, Andy. This report starts on page 63 of your agenda pack, and the report covers two main points. One is the local development scheme, and one is the establishment of a planning and transport policy subcommittee. So starting with the local development scheme, we do have a statutory requirement to produce a local development scheme. And what an LDS is in effect a work programme of the documents we're going to be producing that make up the development plan for Somerset. So looking at that in a little bit more detail, the council also has a legal requirement to produce a local plan within 5 years of vesting day. So that means by the 1st of April 2028. And the timetable on the screen is what we are proposing. It's a really ambitious timetable, given the resources that we have and the just general process of a local plan. It's very involved. Each stage is very significant, and we have to follow certain stages in the legislation. Because we are now a unitary authority, we are a huge geographical area, so everything sort of will take a lot longer to sort of I suppose analyse, come to recommendations on approaches for policy. So it's a very significant piece of work, but we are proposing this timetable as an ambitious one, but we've tried to streamline a number of the stages as well in order for us to try and meet that deadline. A couple of things we are aiming to do is to have one round of formal consultation at the Regulation 18 stage, and that's the early consultation stage. That will be supported by targeted engagement activities. So that could be any number of things, such as going to specialists or local interest groups on a particular area or geographical basis or on a theme. So we're working up a consultation and engagement plan in order to work out the best way to get the information we need from the general public and from interest groups and from specialist groups and statutory consultees as well. We are also aiming that the Regulation 18 consultation will be in the form of a draft plan. So these would be worked up policies rather than an options stage document, which you may have in many former district areas would have worked up an options document before a draft plan document. This isn't to say we wouldn't be working up options. We would be looking at the options at those targeted engagement activities rather than in the full consultation document. Next slide, please. So the local plan timetable, as I say, is very ambitious and lots of things can impact on the timetable. It is quite often that timetables need to change because of many different reasons. And what's set out here are some of the ones that could impact on our timetable. One of them being the Mendip Local Plan Part 2 Site Allocations Review, which has got a really tight timescale table, and it's taken resources away from the main local plan. We had anticipated we would do the work for that within the main local plan, but the High Court judge has ordered us to do that separately and to do that in advance. So that's had an impact. So other things that could have an impact, just budget and resource constraints, any other projects that come forward that take resources away from the local plan. The requirement for main modifications, which could come at a later stage within the local plan process where the inspector requires more information for us, more work and more consultation. Something that quite often affects local plan timetables are the at the national level, planning reform is being mooted about changes to the system and whether there's any changes in national government as well. And finally, as well, about the phosphates mitigation strategy, whether we've got something in place to help inform the local plan. Next slide, please. In the local development scheme, we're proposing that the local plan is produced separately from the minerals plan and from the waste plan. This is a pragmatic approach so that if any one of those three documents had a significant issue that derailed it or delayed it, it wouldn't then derail the others. It enables each of them to be updated more easily. And it's easier to manage, I suppose, the project, each of the individual projects. And at this stage, we are looking at reviewing the minerals plan and waste plan as in an assessment about whether either of those are still up to date and fit for purpose. And it may well conclude that they are, and then we could hopefully just, those would endure over a longer time period, and we wouldn't need to do a full review of those just yet, so that we would then focus on the local plan. With regards to those three documents, local plan, minerals plan, waste plan, plus also the Somerset local transport plan, we would have a shared evidence base. So they would be very collaborative. We would work closely across those teams to ensure that they reflect each other and they, I suppose, work well together to create a land use plan for Somerset. The local transport plan isn't a part of the development plan, so it doesn't have to go in the local development scheme, but we are putting it in there just to demonstrate how interlinked they are. Next slide, please. I did want to point out about climate change policies, because I know it's a real critical and important issue. The local plan is a key document that will help deliver on our climate change strategy. And climate will be absolutely at the heart of the local plan policies, whether it's at the strategic level or at the very detailed development management policy level. And so we'll be looking to maximise opportunities and be really ambitious in our policies. So for this reason, we're not recommending having a separate climate change DPD document, which has been suggested in the past, but we're not recommending it because all of those matters would be considered all together within the local plan. And also, if we were to look at it separately, it would very much divert resources away from delivering the local plan. And because the local plan is the statutory requirement, we must be focusing on that. Unfortunately, we're just in a situation where we don't have the resources to do both. So we have to make a decision, and the local plan is our statutory requirement. And the longer we're without a local plan or an up-to-date local plan means the longer time we're more at risk of planning by appeal, where we may get developers coming in, proposing sites, and we don't have an up-to-date local plan to successfully challenge those. So we've, I suppose a DPD, I suppose on its own, a climate change DPD wouldn't necessarily bring those policies on any sooner if we were to try and bring in stronger policies, because the DPD still has to follow the same process as the local plan. So I suppose it's to reassure you that if we can fully focus on the local plan, that's the most, I suppose, the best way of trying to get stronger policies in place as soon as possible that are strategically considered with all the other requirements that need to be considered in the local plan. Next slide, please. This is the final slide, and this relates to the Planning and Transport Policy Subcommittee. We're proposing setting this up so that it will help our local plan process, making sure that we can get draft documents approved for consultation as soon as possible, because we are facing a really tight timetable. It's also that we can make sure that we get neighbourhood development plans made within the 8 weeks that we're expected to make sure that we can get those on the agenda as soon as we possibly can. We'll also use this subcommittee to agree infrastructure priorities and approve community infrastructure and Section 106 spending priorities, and to consider other documents, perhaps to brief members and look at policy options and draft policies. Thank you. That's the end of this presentation. So if you've got any questions from myself on the local plan or Andy on the statement of community involvement.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Dave?
Got a few. It's best to do them separately. So could we, if I start off with the community involvement side of things, if that's okay, but very much would like to go on to the local plan aspect too. Okay, on the statement community involvement, in 3.10, I must admit I'm getting lost with all the different papers. I think it's Appendix 1. It talks there's a bit about community consultation, which the applicant does, which you would generally expect for larger schemes. It's just a small point, but it is often something I thought that would help, that we should encourage neighbours when they've got a small application, if they just, or an applicant, if they just talk to their neighbours, sometimes you know, that would help in the process. And I just wondered whether we could actually mention that. We can't require it and shouldn't require it, but whether we could encourage neighbours to, you know, applicants to talk to their neighbours about a plan, and whether that was something that, you know, should start off being included in here, but then the most important place to say that is when they do the planning application and they get a prod to do it. Have a chat with your neighbours before you put your plan in. It may help. So that's one. And the other one is to do with publicity requirements, notices that's given. I've sort of got a question in this area. I think I may know, but I'll ask the question to make sure that I do. And it's when, again, when neighbour notifications are given for planning applications. It says that they're not given to neighbours for applications for listed building consent. I think that's because you have two applications. All right, you're nodding. So they do get notified about the application. It's just the separate one on the consent, which actually says the same thing. So that's why that doesn't there. So neighbours would be notified of a listed building application. Yeah.
If it involved works which needed planning permission as well, so external works for the property, which didn't fall under, well, they wouldn't fall under permitted development because they're not, then yes, it would have an accompanying plan application. If it was a listed building consent, and it was only a listed building consent, for example, because internally listed things were being changed, then it wouldn't. But I suppose that's because they're only internal works to the property.
Okay, that's fine, and that does answer it. Thanks. There's another one which is sort of similar to that, which I was less sure on. It says that applications that do not accord with a development plan, for some reason, neighbours aren't notified of those. So that one, again, it might sound quite straightforward, which I'm overlooking, but I couldn't quite understand. You know, possibly an application that isn't in line with the development plan is something neighbours might want to know about even more, not to, so why they shouldn't be notified. But again, I may be missing something there. And also on this, it's got site notices, and sorry, this is from Appendix C, which is actually the statutory requirements, which is what it says we're going to do. It says site notices or neighbourhood notifications. Now, we have talked about this before, and I'm just trying to check whether something is changing what has been our understanding of what goes on. And I don't know what happens in the other districts, but in Somerset, Western Taunton, in the West District, we do both, and that's the expectation. And I think it's right that both are done. And if we start just putting site notices or only notifying adjacent neighbours, it's unfair on people if they don't know about a planning application in their area. And I wouldn't like to see something being changed without us understanding what's going on. So I hope our policy will remain as it is in our area, that both are done, and I believe that's important. And I would like to see that stated in here, because my reading of it at the moment is it's saying either or, where it should be both.
On the point of notices, yeah, as you say, the appendix sets out the statutory requirements in terms of either or, site notices or neighbour notifications. My understanding is as yours is, but actually what happens in practice is a lot of officers will put a site notice and some neighbour notifications in terms of publicity of applications. Yes, is listed as a statutory requirements, and yes, I suppose because being mindful of future resources. of planning function, I suppose, and not wanting to, because yes, I sets the high level context over engagement. There is a risk, I suppose, of over promising if the situation emerges that actually there will be circumstances where we did an either or. I mean, the problem with this site notification, neighbour notification issue is trying to be explicit around what happens in the SCI is quite difficult, because depending on the application, you could take quite different circumstances. There will no doubt be circumstances for certain applications where only a site notice is put up. I expect, for certain proposals which don't have significant interest or are of a nature which, in a very rural area where there's no immediately adjoining neighbours who are going to have an interest. So that's why the decision was made that we keep it in the SCIs for statutory requirements. I think the point is, and this reflects a lot on elements of the document, is in practice, you're correct. I believe a lot of officers will make sure that neighbour notifications and site notices are done. That's certainly the process at the moment, which a lot of planning officers adopt. On the point of the pre-application, I think which I think was your first query, we referred to applicants in it because, and I suppose we haven't really referred to the scale of development on that point, because we wanted to, you're right, the logical thing is that applicants should be making their engagement before an application is proportionate to what they're doing. So even if you're a householder applicant, and the logical thing, of course, is to go and speak to your neighbours, or talk to people about what you're proposing, because that it normally means that it has a much easier consideration for the application, because people understand what's being proposed. So that's why we refer to applicants and not explicit around different scales of development or planning agents or housing developers as such, because we want to keep it as all scales of development should have appropriate proportionate engagement.
If I may, Chair, just to pursue on those. Okay, well, thanks for your reply. I would like to suggest that it would be helpful if it could state in this document that there will be some encouragement given for the small applicants that applicants do notify their neighbours. Not required, but just encourage it. I don't think you answered on the bit about the not in accordance with development plan, why neighbours wouldn't be notified by about those. Can I also suggest that from this committee that we ask for the current policy to remain? So this relates to Appendix 1. It's 3.25 is our bit. And there it says the council is required to publicise an application either by serving a written notice to neighbours or by displaying a site notice. I would like our committee to say that we would like both of those to continue to happen as they do at the moment. Otherwise, this is a saving by stealth without us being notified, where the practice that we have at the moment could change, because this is not what happens, at least in my area at the moment, and I think we need to keep it the same, and I'd be concerned if it changes to what is suggested in this document. So if there is anything, if it's not, I mean, if you are able to respond on why applicants which do not accord with the development plan aren't notified to neighbours, if you can say why neighbours shouldn't be notified. I can't, as I say, I think they should be and may want to know about them even more. So are you able to answer that one?
I think it's the nuance of how the different types of applications are set out, because in the table, if any one of those points bites, then it triggers the requirement. So I think it's there, particularly on the need to advertise, even if it's non-major development, which doesn't accord with the development plan. But the point is if it fell within any of those other considerations, it being non-major development anyway, which is, I think, the second row from the bottom of that page, then it triggers the neighbour notification anyway. So I think it's picking up on the fact that non-major developments would otherwise not need a newspaper advertisement if they were to not accord with a development plan. So to pick on the point that any application which doesn't accord with a development plan would require an appropriate newspaper advertisement, if that makes sense. You have to sort of Yeah, I think in terms of a simple answer, it would be picked up on the fact that it would be covered by the other application types, which are core. And the reason for having that point about not according with development plan is to explicitly mean that newspaper advertisements are required for non-major developments which don't accord to the development plan. So, for example, if you had 9 dwellings in the countryside, that wouldn't technically put a trigger being non-major for an advertisement in the newspaper. That would trigger that it would be required.
You go back, come back.
Well, I'm not clear. I was only asking about neighbour notifications. I'll just keep my fingers crossed and hope it works out okay. I must admit I'm in complete fog and don't understand why they shouldn't be notified, but let's leave it there. It's not that important.
Being dealt with issues where neighbours didn't know of planning applications because they were perhaps back to back rather than next door, I would support what the councillor is saying. I think it's quite clear. It needs to be clear in my view as well. But we're not a committee that can vote on something in those terms. So I think we have to ask you to take that on board.
Martin?
I think
if I may, the other thing though that we can do, and is part of our function, is to make recommendations. Part of our function is to make recommendations to executive when they take the decision. So I've made a couple of suggestions for recommendations I hope that we can make in regard to the neighbourhood notifications and having a chat with neighbours. So if I could ask that those be put forward as part of what the report from Scrutiny, which goes to executive.
I think I would support that. If there's anybody around the table who violently opposes that suggestion, then do speak now. Oh, Marcus.
Can you just clarify what that suggestion is again?
Is that what you were going to ask? I think Paul Hickson Paul Hickson's online and he will come in and perhaps help to answer that question.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to suggest that maybe in addition to any kind of feedback made, that we also provide Councillor Mansell with a detailed written response on the matters he's raising. We're getting into, I would suggest, maybe quite operational matters about the treatment of individual notifications related to planning applications, and we might want to give him a written overview of the position to supplement the kind of the discussion had at the committee itself.
I think we'd welcome that. I'm not sure where to go with this now. Sorry, Adam.
Right, thank you, Chair. I'm thinking I'd like to support Councillor Mansell's request for some sort of recommendation in relation to the document sets out the statutory requirements for either notifying neighbours by letter or putting a site notice up, and sets the circumstances out for that. But in some cases, in parts of the county, and often both methods of publicity are appropriate, and maybe they are done well sometimes, and maybe sometimes we in our divisions we have had problems with when neighbours haven't been notified by letter and haven't seen a site notice, and there's much more fuss made at that point than if they'd seen it. And so there's trouble with that when that doesn't happen. So maybe a briefing note would be useful on that, but also it may be appropriate to recommend that something is added into this SCI document at that point, 324, that says in many cases both a site notice and neighbour notification letters may be appropriate or will be appropriate. But we can recommend that, can't we?
Dave's nodding in agreement with that. So did we all get that from Adam? It's a sort of summary of.
Chair, is that sorry, is that definitely the recommendation then? So what?
Yes, I'm taking what Adam said as a recommendation.
Right. Okay.
And so that is seconded. Yeah. Do you, Marcus? Do you still want a?
Well, so for clarity, what we're saying is, apart from site notices that I think sometimes get sent in the post for the applicant to put up, are we saying that apart from site notices, that letters go to neighbours? And have we made a definition of neighbours? Because nobody in South Wales notified me when they put a wind turbine up. I can see that from my window.
All right, Dave, have a go.
This did come up because this was a budget saving, some may recall, and and officers at that time did say it would be adjacent neighbours, so what those living next door. So there was some indication then.
So if I can, I think, yeah, there's a recommendation there that will go forward. As Paul says, we'll clarify in writing. I'm not close enough to the detail to give definitions of neighbours. I think so. We're not making up a change on the hoof that is definitely going into this document. You're making a recommendation that we will consider. We'll write back and we'll update you, and you'll be able to see that before it goes through to exec. Yeah.
I think we have to settle for that. Yeah. Okay. That's the only power we have, the power of recommendation. And we seem to be mostly in agreement over that. So thank you very much for that. Now, somebody else had their hand up. Was it Alan? Yeah.
What a big subject this is. It's more important than drainage planning. I've been involved in Sedgemoor and it was 16 years, and the record of Sedgemoor District Council stands for itself. The development they've had and the things they haven't stood still, they've got on with it, and everybody else is trying to play catch up. That's the reality of it all. I'm sorry, but we've got a system at the moment when planning officers are leaving. Staff is very short within the offices, and the system's going to break down. In fact, it's starting to break down already. Anybody spending their own money, the time they start applying for planning consent, to the time they get it might take 2.5, maybe 3 years. Right? In that period of time, the house, what it costs, and the budgets that people got to go within builders and everything else to do it is totally thrown out the door. That you'll find there's a county council ruling out a lot of the contract you've made to be thrown out the door because it just doesn't work. It takes too long. There's too many surveys. I'm going to be really, really bold now and honest. I always am honest. I had to be, because that's you can always answer your question in truth. Then local parish and town councils, people get on that committee very often to try and stop a bit of planning. They'd be a damn nuisance. And by God, they are sometimes. They're very well informed and they do hold the procedure up. There's no point in beating about the bush. That's how it is. Now, regardless of politics, I don't bring that into it, but I'm going to. We don't know the policies of various other parties regarding development because we've got some parties all full of the immigrants coming in, everybody supplying houses and all the rest of them for them. You don't want to build no houses. So that to me just don't sound right. It just don't sound right. I'm a chap. I've been involved in development a couple of times in my time. I got a lot of experience in dealing with things. Sill payments. That's the thing that often dictates people's minds when it comes to a planning consent at a parish or town council meeting. Sill payments. Are they going to continue at the same rate as they have? Because most developers in our area in Sedgemoor, they've cut, like you know, from 30% down to 10% to get planning consent, and then they cut the affordable homes number, and that affects everything else. Is the sill payments going to stay the same, and are we going to be subject to all these rules? I'm trying to be quite honest here, because you've got to go survey for this, and a survey for that, and a survey for this, and a survey for that, and a survey for this. With a survey and tied up the apps that's coming into our life, I'm beginning to think, maybe it's time I went backwards. Sill payments.
Is there an answer on that one?
I mean, at the moment, we have separate charging areas for sill payments for the different former district authorities who adopted sill. So that doesn't change at the moment. I think it will have to be considered going forward, but of course there's awful lot of planning reform around abandoning sill. So we'll have to react. I think we have to probably be more reactive to what the national reforms, which might come through over changes from the community infrastructure levy to a different form. But I mean, as what Alan suggested, but it illustrates the challenges over preparing a local plan in terms of all the things you've listed over the things which impact on development and the viability of development. The local plan reviews, you have to consider things like affordable housing contributions, new policy things such as biodiversity net gain, phosphates if there's still a need for phosphate mitigation, and all these things like development viability is going to be one of the very involved areas which the new local plan is going to have to look at in terms of making sure it's a deliverable plan. So that, I hope that answers the question. So there's no immediate plans in the local development scheme. I'm looking nervously at Laura to review still at the moment, but that is because of the national reform. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Laura.
Well, so we do. No, Ros Wyke is has a hand up. I think you'd like to.
Okay. Just to say that the officer's correct. SIL payments currently are based on the local plans in each of the areas, and it will take the new local plan for the whole of the county before the SIL payment can be changed or altered or introduced by 2028. Yeah. The second thing is that yes, you're right. There are lots of plans and reports need to be done now on planning because, you know, life is changing and we are very dependent on the national framework. So yes, developers do need to produce a flood plan so they don't build on the floodplain. They do need to produce plans from this month, next month on bionet gain. And they do need to produce plans on the impact it has on the wider environment, etc. So while I appreciate you may be yearning for the day when somebody could knock up a few houses without too much trouble, the reality is now that the national planning process is very complex. It's subject to continual change, and the officers need to take that into account when considering planning applications.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that response. Thank you. And we've worked together in Stonewall board for a number of years, and you know what sort of a character I am. I'm going to put that survey out for one, if I can, Mr. Chairman. It's a hell of a cost for development, these bat surveys, and it takes an awful long time. Now, most people, in particular farmers, they would agree to do it without all the red tape and the trouble. You just don't want it. You've got somebody in your attic 2 or 3 times a year, and you find a different sort of a bat. It's another survey, and I think it needs to be looked at if you want houses built quicker. And if you don't have houses built quicker, you're going to have a lot more people homeless, and the rents are going to continue to rise. I'm sure you wouldn't want to see that.
I think it's what we can do. I agree with you, Alan, but I think it's what we can do within the limits of the local plan as verified from central government. We are responsible to them, and they dictate many of the considerations that we have to operate under. Right. I think Dave wanted to come back. Then I'd like to ask Helen Kay to come in online, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I've got comments on the local plan, and to be honest, these are actually the more significant ones for me. So a few points.
If I may, then, because we're moving on somewhat. So let me just. I'm just anticipating Helen might want to talk about the issue of planning specifically. Helen, are you there? Would you like to answer your question first?
Well, no, hello, thank you, Chair. My questions were not on the SCI, they were about the local plan. So I don't know if Dave Mansell, as a committee member, wants to speak first. So, or shall I go ahead?
You can go ahead.
Okay, right, thank you. So looking at page 64, I'm actually going to get up the report, so I can't see what looking at page 64 of the report, it says that we have to do this local development scheme. We have to do it within 5 years, and we basically don't have any leeway, and there's no other way of doing it. I understand that the development documents have to be done, and then it says other options considered. There is no alternative option to meet the statutory requirement. All I want to do is a point of information, really, is that when I was on the Constitution and Government Committee, and we did have an opportunity to either have the local plan overseen by a subcommittee of the executive, which we have more detail about that in Appendix 2, or it could have been a small committee of the full council. So there didn't really seem to be very much debate on it, and it went through as being a subcommittee of the executive, which will have on it, according to Appendix 2, Councillor Ros White and Councillor Mike Rigby and a couple of others. So just to bring that to people's awareness, is that means that it's all going to be decided, sort of the managed by the administration. If that is going to be the case, can I please ask Dixie Darch to consider putting herself forward to also be on that subcommittee, so that we do have a balance of, so we have somebody that knows about environmental issues and the climate change issues sitting on that subcommittee. And that would then, given the rationale, reading through the fact that they're saying at the moment that we can't have another development plan document addressing climate change, I think it's really important to have somebody managing the process that understands all those issues around climate change. So that's my first suggestion. The second thing is just regarding Mendip in particular. We've got this problem with, we've got to find an extra 505 houses, and on page 68, it's paragraph 19. I don't really quite understand. There's something in this paragraph I don't understand what it means. It's near the bottom, and paragraph 19. It says that we have a certain timetable that's been given to us by the inspector. We've got to get all this done up within about a year to find an extra 505 houses, and the allocations process has just changed. The bidding process has been taking place over the summer, and it's just finished. Then it says at the bottom here, given the need to bring forward a Somerset-wide development plan, a wider exercise for the East area, e.g. more housing or review of strategic policies, is neither warranted or justified. I don't really understand what that sentence means, so I wanted to ask a question about that sentence. And then I'd like to, maybe if you could answer those questions first, and then I'd like to come back and have a third question. Or shall I go on and say the third question now?
No, stop there a minute, because I think I'm going to ask Ros White to just come in. You had an answer to one of those questions, I think.
Most definitely. The papers were published before the decision was made, and yes, the portfolio holder for climate is a member of the subcommittee as a specified individual. And I'll hand over to the officer to respond.
That's great. Thank you very much. On the other matter.
Thank you. Yes, on that paragraph 19, I think you might have pointed out a minor typo. It's meant to be saying that given the need to bring forward a Somerset-wide development plan, a wider exercise beyond the East area is not warranted or justified at this time, because the focus of the call for sites that were closed a few weeks ago, last month, that was specifically focused on the East area to deal with the Mendip local plan review. And that paragraph is saying that at this moment in time, the call for sites is not going beyond the East area, because that will happen through the Somerset-wide development plan. So sorry, yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
Okay, it's just I didn't understand it. So it's basically that call for sites, and the way that we decide how we allocate those sites is we are going to have a briefing on this next week, I think. But I assume it's going to be done within the current local plan framework that we have for Mendip, and which will basically push most of the housing towards Froome, I imagine. But that's so we're not going to be having any kind of strategic review. I read it as a possible strategic review of policies for the Mendip local plan. That's not going to happen. Yes.
That's correct.
No. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Right. Okay. So I'll move on to my third question, which is that obviously there's quite a long justification in here for why we shouldn't have a separate development plan document running in parallel to developing a local plan. And it's explaining that it's about resources, basically, that we haven't got the staff. If we take it puts forward two possible plans of action. One is a development plan document, and it says that it's too onerous to do that. And anyway, we're going to be looking at all climate change issues as part of the local plan. The problem is that doesn't become sort of law. We can't use it till 2028, possibly 2029 even. And in the meantime, we've got 6 years where there's developers are coming forward, and there are, I think, 3 out of 5 old development plans are not current, and we have housing shortages, and so we're getting inappropriate developments for large housing estates coming forward, and we have very little to be able to back them off with, and if at least we can get high levels of sort of saving as many trees and hedgerows as possible and getting high levels of energy efficiency and solar panels on everything, etc. That would be helpful. And if we could do that within a year, if it takes a year to do that, or 2 years, I actually think that is pretty important. I mean, we just had discussions earlier about flooding and how highways are having to deal with flooding. And wouldn't it be great if we made sure that every single new estate had, the onus was on the developer to put in sufficient drainage capacity, not on us as a local authority to have to pick the problem up after they've created the problem. It seems to me to be very logical to be trying to do this first, and that we really need to find those resources somehow to bring people in to do that development plan document. If that is impossible, there is a second, absolutely impossible, and I'm really not convinced it is. There is a second option, which is about some guidance. Guidance is obviously not as weighty, but there's a second best idea, which is taken from, I think it was Somerset West and Taunton, that there's some guidance that already exists. It's called climate positive planning, and there was a suggestion that that could be rolled out. But even that has to be apparently consulted on, and it's been suggested it's going to take one officer 1 year to do that, and even that is considered too onerous. I would say that if that's the second option, and it's not as resource intensive, that we really should be considering that, even if it's just guidance, and trying to bring people in. And I know there isn't a magic money tree, and I know we've got all kinds of issues with staff, but I suppose I'm expressing my disappointment about what's written in this report, and the fact that we are saying we're not going to do this. I mean, even earlier on, I only joined the meeting late when you were talking about the forward plan. I very quickly looked at it, and we're on amber for getting the climate emergency plan together. And as I understand it, we've got staff shortages, and we haven't really got started on putting a climate emergency plan together. I'm just wondering how we're actually tackling this, if we're not tackling it through planning, if we're not tackling it through the climate emergency plan. I'm sorry, I'm expressing my frustration. Over to you.
I'd like to let Dave Mansell back in at this point.
Thank you. And probably the main thing I did wish to raise was on the DVD. I've got some other points as well. I would have done all 3 together, but perhaps if I just talk about the DVD.
If it relates to that, that's good.
Yeah, so I'll just talk about that for the moment, if I may. Okay, and it's something I've been raising for quite some time, and I do note what's said in the report. I do think it'd be helpful if I could just give a little bit more information on what I've got in mind, at least for this. I think perhaps actually, as Helen mentioned it, I should actually start just by talking about the climate positive planning as an approach, which is good, and I'm pleased it happened in Somerset West and Taunton, but it did take a bit of resource to put together, and I have to say it's really quite complicated though, so it's a value, and I'm really pleased it's there. What difference it makes, I'm not quite so sure. Hopefully it does make some difference, but it's just aspirational, and it tries to encourage applicants to adopt it. But partly because it's so complicated, I think most of them don't understand it. And perhaps it might just have been simple as say, we would like you to do this. We can't require you to do this. We would like to do this. And maybe that would have been another way that it could be more simply applied across the whole of Somerset. So I sort of put that as a positive idea, but not to say, if the climate positive planning, which is what was done in Somerset West and Taunton, is the only thing that can be done. It is good, but I do appreciate resource that takes, and as you gather, a few reservations. What
to me is much more important, and it's partly as a result of seeing what happened with the climate positive planning and the fact that it didn't make a lot of difference, why having a DPD is important in my view, and would like to see it happening now. And I too, as Helen indicated, would like to see the resources provided for this. Don't want to take anything away from what the local plan and stopping the local plan proceeding with your 5 years. Don't wish to stop that. This is something else that needs doing that would be part of it in any case, but needs being done more quickly. Now, there is a question of what does it cover? Now, for me, the most important things to cover where it could make a difference, and I'm sure there are others, but the ones I particularly put forward are zero carbon energy standards for new development, and it requires it to be part of planning policy. That's the way to take it forward. And it does make a difference. It means those houses will actually have the insulation levels which we will need, and it won't have to be added in again later on and cost more. It can be done once the standard then applies. The other thing that it can do is have planning policies which cover renewable energy generation and storage in the right locations within Somerset. And that can be enabled a lot better if we've got some policies behind it. And we had a report earlier on where a lot of the preparation work has been done. That's what this local area energy plan and the energy resource assessments has done. So we've actually got a lot of the background work done, and then we're not going to be able to take it forward because we're going to have to wait. And the logical place, that can do a number of things, but one of the places where it needs to take forward is through planning policy, and the DPD could do that. So those are two of the main areas, possibly the only areas given resources. There may be others that potentially might be easily added, but I'd pick those two out in particular. One that I would also consider, though, is adaptation, where we are seeing climate change is happening. We're seeing it's occurring more and causing problem. And the sooner we can get some planning policies built into the system, so houses and development is designed better to cope with that, the sooner. And the longer we leave it, the more difficult these problems are. So that would be another potential candidate. But, you know, I would take others' advice who will know more on that one about what could be achieved. Now, I'm sure they will all be in the final plan, but the trouble is it's not till 2028. We're waiting too long, and the work needs doing, so it will be there. We can learn from some other areas which have developed the evidence in these areas and have done it. And I particularly draw attention to Bath and North East Somerset, who've done it as part of their local plan, Cornwall and Warwick, who've done it as DPDs. So we've got, and Cornwall and Warwick in particular shared some of what they have done, and I'm sure would be happy to share with us too. So we've got a little bit of a head start for part of it. From what I can gather in Cornwall and Warwick, it is hard to work out quite when they started from reading their committee papers, but it looks like it took no more than 3 years, but it does take a time. But even that, I think, is worth doing to get those in place and done. And that's the main message I'm putting, simply because we've got to get on with this. We've got to show some urgency. These things are important, and we need to move them on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Adam.
Thank you. I'm just thinking like, I believe Helen Kay has sent something online, but I'd like to make a proposal that clearly that this is a big issue for many of us on the committee, some of us at least, that the climate change policies should be a priority in light of the Council's climate emergency declarations, a climate strategy, which we're doing, and the energy plan we talked about earlier, that we have a look again, that we as a committee make a recommendation that the need for a climate change specific DPD in whatever form, however light touch we can do looking at our previous other examples, is looked at again as a priority in the plan process, and that potential external funding and opportunities for resourcing that is looked at again, because it's a priority of this council. I'd like to make that recommendation. If we can adopt that, great.
I'm prepared to take that as a proposal that can be seconded.
If I may, I mean, I'm happy. I believe that's what I just proposed. I mean, whether if I didn't use the right words, but I'm very happy if Adam would like to second it, and pleased that you're happy with it as well. But I think that was the whole thrust of what I was just saying.
Yeah, you see, so I took it the other way, but that's okay. I'm happy to change that round, but Ros wants to come in.
Like to remind Councillor Boyden and others who have sat through the years of developing a local plan, but as the local plan starts maturing, it then becomes evidence which you can then bring forward on planning applications, because this I think the correct term is the emerging plan becomes increasingly materially relevant to regarding planning applications. And I'd just like to remind people that plans are basically like so scarce. It's very difficult, particularly planning policy people. And if we're going to try and do the local plan in 5 years, then the more additional chores and jobs and things we ask them to do over and above what is going to be quite significant when the phosphate floodgates open as well, which we anticipate may actually happen, but to look for an additional document which is going to be fed in all the way through the local plan, I think is probably a little optimistic. Best will in the world, it's going to take 3 years. 3 years we'll have an emerging local plan which will have the elements of it. Great work is being done on the energy and plan and various other things. So it's not as if it's been done in a totally empty environment. A huge amount of work is being done on collecting information and making sure that we have the evidence for the examination of our new plan. So I think asking for an additional 3-year looking at a DPD is, I think, a little optimistic. Doesn't mean we shouldn't go away and look at it again. I'm quite happy to do that, but I'm just trying to be, as Alan was saying, as truthful as possible that we're really up against it to actually get the local plan in place for 2028.
I think I accept all of that and accept the logistics, but as far as the scrutiny committee, we're here to scrutinise. We're here to make suggestions and come up with recommendations that will then go back. And I think a very sound recommendation has been made that should go back and be considered. So I'm prepared to put that. But before I do that, Mike Stanton is on the line, has been waiting a long time. I'd like to hear what he's got to say first in case it impacts on this debate.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for indulging me as a non-member of the committee. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? It sounds as if you can't hear me.
We can hear you.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, we can hear you, Mike.
Thanks,
Yes.
Yes, two things. Firstly, on Helen's question about sustainable urban drainage schemes, I was under the impression that we were now requiring these, but a point worth making is that the Rivers Authority, which I chair, has done a lot of work on how to make those work and how well, which ones work well. So that will be worth looking at for this committee. The other point related to the debate you've just been having, it really stems from Councillor Alan Bradford's remarks. And that is the building lots of houses. Yes, Sedgemoor has approved lots of development, but a lot of it is built on the floodplain, and that really potentially depends a bit on whether the Bridgewater barrier gets built and works and lasts long enough. But it potentially creates a lot of problems. As chair of the SRA, I spend a lot of time, particularly since January's near flood event, listening to people who are at risk simply because their houses were built where they really shouldn't have been built. And it would be useful if this committee could look at that aspect of planning and stop us building houses on the floodplain. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, we're going to move it. I think we need to move this to a conclusion. Okay, Marcus.
So I was going to say a couple of things, but then I've lost the will to live somewhere since 1 o'clock, I think. A couple of questions, actually, getting back to the report and documents in front of us. I've been looking, when's this, about, I can't find a date, but how long is this local plan going to run to? Just, that's the first question.
That's to be decided, but it would be probably 20 years.
So I'm 54, I don't blow a valve.
Though local plans you don't wait 20 years before it gets reviewed. You have to review every 5 years. Yeah.
It can get, but let's be realistic. What actually happens is like everybody looks at how much it's going to take to review it, and then think, well, we can't be bothered really. It's okay, we'll muddle along. So that means if I don't blow a valve, I'll be 74. I'll be long gone if I'm not dead, so that's fine. I think what my question, I suppose, looking at this document, and I did print it out, and I apologise to Dixie and anyone and the Green Party for printing it out, but it's going to be very entertaining reading on the toilet. And that was mainly the comments, and my favourite is comment 131, fantastic. I think me and Alan should just start our own party, actually, to be honest. But I think, I mean, it says something, I think, on this is, when the priest's comments are probably the most sane, it's just very interesting. And I think the questions I'd like to ask is, of the consultation responses, how many of the individual responses are also members of parish councils, and how many that excludes then businesses that are actually in the planning industry? So that would be nice to know if that data is available. On that, and I'd love to know if anybody under the age of 40 actually consulted on it. I mean, it's just incredible reading the comments. I mean, there you go. I'm just at a loss. Newspaper adverts. Who reads a newspaper? Anybody here bought a newspaper? No. Anybody bought a newspaper? You know, one of those things that come on paper? No. Anybody else in the room? No. I think the last newspaper I bought was a Sunday Sport, for God's sake. I mean, and the other thing is, we've got in here, and I'm all for equality and diversity. I'm sorry if I'm getting agitated, but I'm very hungry now, and the Tic Tacs didn't hit the spot. I'm all for equality and diversity, but it says people unwilling to use digital means, not people not capable, not people who can't use an iPhone or don't know how the internet works, people unwilling to use digital means. It's like in the 70s. Remember those people like your great aunt didn't have a telephone because the world might end if you dare have a telephone and something. I mean, it's bonkers. Why are we putting up with these people? If they can't be bothered to use the internet, why are we putting down with them? No, I'm on one. I'm not. It's just ridiculous. And I don't. So, and what I would say is, I don't envy planning officers. Michael Gove with his permitted development rights. Well, I wonder why he's making those changes or wants to make those changes. And I think we do have to have a long look at whether, the plan-led system as a system has failed. Has it failed? We've got no houses. We've got all those houses not being built because of phosphates. We've got people homeless. We've got families staying with homelessness. At some point, we've got to have a look at this local plan and think, well, we look at the consultations for a start, and we've got to have a look at it and think, how quick can we do it? With regard to your climate change proposal, I'm tended to agree with it because I do think it's important enough, and I do think how we get that in there. So it's important, and I think the executive will use resources, and no criticism of the executive here. But you only have to look at what happened with the history of a solar farm in West Somerset, and it was hysteria. It was unbelievable. I mean, and then you have people going on about, at one end, you have people going on about food security, and the same, you look at all the biofuels being grown. We stopped growing biofuels, that would solve half the food security problem. So I do think that policy with climate change development plan is possibly something that this committee that I support and have that put forward. I'm going to maybe shut up before I put my foot in.
I think that's probably wise, but you
have one final thing.
All right,
I do think encouraging people to speak for their neighbours is very admirable, David, if not a little bit naive. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. A sort of outburst there of probably quite appropriate annoyance and agitation, but
I can just come back, Chair. I've been told to keep quiet as well. That's me keeping quiet.
I think I understand. I sympathise with your frustrations. I think, however, you did support. Sorry, Helen, make it quick, please. I'm about to die.
I'm sorry about you not waiting for your lunch, but I'm not really quite sure where we went with Adam and Dave's proposal.
Well, let me run the meeting, please. Thank you. I believe Adam repeated what David said, although David not made it as a proposal. So I'm going to take it back to Dave to make the proposal, Adam to second it, then we'll take a vote on recommendation. Thank you very much.
Okay, can I ask about the recommendation with the process involved? You make a recommendation, does that then go back to the local plan subcommittee and then they respond to it? And do we get a response in writing to this environment committee?
Yeah, Ros wants to come in as well, but the decision we're consulting you on includes establishing that subcommittee, so it doesn't yet exist. So I think this will be reflected in what we take through the exec. We've heard a strong view from this scrutiny committee of the desire for doing more quickly on climate change, in particular a DPD, and I think that will go forward, get reflected in the paper to exec. But I'll pass over to Ros as well.
Yes. Okay. Dave, can you in a nutshell put this proposal?
I think that probably was it, what Mickey just said. So it is that we asked the exec to look at doing a DPD, which especially advances some of our climate emergency objectives, in particular zero carbon energy standards for new development, renewable energy generation, siting, maybe some more, but I think that is it in a nutshell. Adam, do you want to add?
Yes, that's fine. Adam.
Can I say yes? That's right, and to be separate from the local plan and to an earlier timescale to reflect the climate emergency declaration.
I'm putting that to the vote. I'll retain. Tom, would you like to speak? I will put that to those in, and I will retain my right to a casting vote on it. So those in favour of the proposal, please. That's carried. Thank you very much. Right. We are at an end of this meeting, which went on incredibly long. I'm sorry.
Yes, so but I'm really sorry. I would have got them all in earlier. It's been a little bit of a problem having the community engagement and the local plan in one report. I think this is muddled. It should have been two reports, but anyway, I think it is important. Other things, I will restrict it to one. I would have had two, but also the bit on the local plan is about setting up a subcommittee of the executive. And we talked about that. I would just like to check and make sure I understand it will follow executive procedure rules. So can we check that means other members can speak at that? It would be a public meeting. The other aspect is what scrutiny will there be? So ideally, I would have liked to have seen a more cross-party process for this, which is the route Somerset Western Taunton previously took when it started on its local plan. I think that's not going to happen, but can we at least be told what's going to happen for scrutiny on the local plan for the wider involvement of other members and especially the other groups, because at the moment there's nothing there.
Thank you.
Councillor Mansell, I just wanted to reassure you that we're planning to set up a local plans cross-party working group of some such name to hopefully provide that scrutiny, and which will deal with a lot of the early stages of development of policies, scrutinise the options that we're going to be looking at. So that will hopefully form that element for you.
Well, it'd be added to the report when it goes to executive, because that's very important.
Yeah, can I come in? Sorry. Yeah, so I think we'll reflect on that and now to section in on about how we do all that wider, because engagement and scrutiny are two slightly different roles. So I think we'll take away the question and reflect it in the final report. Yeah.
Are you all right now? You've done right. Thank you. I'm not diminishing what you said. Therefore, that's the last item I hope.
Yes.
You what?
Yes.
Yeah. I thought you could say no, I got it wrong. That's the last item on the agenda. Just like to say before we go, yes, Henry, we want to discuss.
We agreed before this meeting finished, we'd sort out the October date.
And I am just about to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And any other business. What I suggest is we won't be able to set a date amongst ourselves until we know when the experts are going to be available. So I suggest that we ask, would it be Kirsty's? You and I would like you to be involved in this with me and Adam in setting this up, and we get back to Kirsty and we ask her to contact the appropriate people. I think probably copy one another into an email, and we then set a date. And we can't open diaries now and decide who's not, because inevitably some of us won't be available. Is that okay?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the only thing I would say is that we need to get on with inviting people, because we're now running out of time from July when this decision was originally made.
I absolutely agree with you. Of course, the cancellations have not been our fault. Yeah, okay, right, thank you very much.
There was only one cancellation, and that was Peter Lamb.
There's a meeting
Natural England refused to come if he wasn't.
I don't want to prolong the meeting, but Wessex Water pulled out of a previous invitation. Didn't they?
They didn't, Mr. Chairman. Matt Whelan has been in contact with
them. Then I apologise if I got that wrong. It must have been a conversation I misheard. The meeting is now over. Thank you very much.